T-minus 50 seconds. T-minus 40 seconds. T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
All right, perfect. All right, I think we're good to go. Everybody's up here. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are the space is called True Stories of January 6th, and I wanted to kind of run through how I would like to run the space tonight because I've attended a lot of spaces where I've been a speaker or I've listened to spaces about January 6th, and for those of you who attend a lot of spaces, listen to them or participate in them, you probably know that typically spaces are just kind of a free forum for people speaking. It's very casual. People listen, people raise their hands, they ask questions, they express, ideas or thoughts. And with tonight, what I really want to do is give an opportunity for people who have experienced being in DC on January 6th, being raided by the FBI, going through the legal process, being labeled an insurrectionist, being labeled a terrorist, and what this has done to people's lives and what this experience has been like. I want to give an opportunity to people to just tell these stories. So what I don't really want to do with this particular January 6th space is just open it up for people's speculations or theories. I don't want to spend all night talking about Ray-Eps. I don't want to spend all night speculating about all these different things. I really just want to kind of give people an opportunity to tell their true stories and just deal with the facts that have happened. I have invited Julie Kelly into the space, who I would say is probably the most educated person in the entire country, possibly the world, on the topic of January 6th and what's taken place, because I think she's reported on and studied the various cases and various elements. Geri, mute yourself. Geri, you're doing crazy things. Hold on, I'm going to mute your mic. 1 second. All right. So Julie is basically like America's spokesmodel for January 6th. And she's been very, very busy today. I think she was just on the Tucker Carlson show. I know she has to dip in like 30 minutes, 20 minutes or so to do Larry Elder. By the way, I'd like to give a big shout out to Tucker Carlson and Larry Elder for being two in a small group of conservative journalists who have actually spoken consistently about January 6th since the very beginning and been kind of on the front lines of trying to get the truth out there and actually investigate when so many other conservative journalists and reporters have gone totally silent on the topic. But Julie Kelly is one of the most outspoken and knowledgeable people on the topic. And I know she has to jump in 20 minutes. And then she said she'll come back after she finishes her Larry Elder interview. So, Julie, do you want to kind of do you want to say hi and kind of get things started? And then we'll move on from there?
Yes, of course. So thank you, Brandon, my friend, who we've been in communications for a year and a half now. So thank you for hosting this, and I'm anxious to hear everyone's stories. Looking back now at the 2-year anniversary, which just seems inconceivable. But I will say over the course of the past 2 years, maybe 20 months, and Brandon, you could probably personally attest to this. When I would talk to January 6th defendants, and we would just get a flood in American greatness, the people who are being arrested and prosecuted and subjected to FBI raids, and they really didn't have anywhere else to go. And I'm not bragging, but I'm just saying we started writing about it really early, like February of 2021. And what I would tell them, and Brandon, I think you can confirm this, is look, the truth about that day eventually will be told. It might take a while. It might take a few years. I don't think it will take as long as Russiagate. but we are going to find out exactly what happened, who was responsible, and the interests, the agencies who are working behind the scenes. And I think now, 2 years later, that sort of is coming true, and the regime and the media's narrative is crumbling rapidly, not just from coverage that we've done at American Greatness, people like Darren Beatty, obviously Tucker, and the handful of conservative influencers who have helped tell this story, but under the weight of their own evidence coming out at trials, coming out in the January 6th Select Committee report, coming out in the House Republican report. So I think now, 2 years later, Americans are starting to wonder if what they really saw on their TV screens that afternoon was really the truth about what was happening.
Well, God, I hope you're really right about that, Julie. And I want to, because I know you're short on time right at the moment, I want to share just a really kind of quick, funny little thing about my relationship with you. And then I'd like to ask you to kind of summarize for us just what your opinion is about January 6th and what it actually was. But before I do that, I just want to tell everybody that I'm one of those people you were just talking about who reached out to you probably around the summer of 2021. I was just like every other January 6th defendant. I was traumatized. I was suffering with PTSD. I was scared about the direction my case was headed in. And I reached out to you as you being a journalist, because I was hoping you could help me get more information. I couldn't get any information outside of my own case about what was going on. And my relationship with you began, first of all, I guess I'll take an opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for being so open. Thank you for being so willing, because I was a stranger reaching out to you, even though you may have possibly heard of me, but I was a stranger reaching out to you in a desperate situation. And you know, for a while there, kind of took me under your wing, and then we actually developed a friendship. And now we call each other and just sort of laugh about things, and you know, we have a much more lighthearted relationship. But I do remember toward the end of 2021, this conversation that always just makes me laugh when I think about it, because I think like every January 6th defendant, there was a moment when I truly believed my charges would be dropped. I think every January 6th defendant has had that moment where they're like, "Oh no, they're going to drop my charges." And I called you, and I remember I was like, "Oh, I'm pretty sure my case is going to get dropped. My attorney is sure of it." And you were like, "Oh, sweetie, oh, honey." And like oh, I always love that moment between us where you're just like, "Sweetheart, that's not happening."
I do remember that. And I remember feeling bad being the bearer of bad news, but also having observed it for even the short amount of time, I was like, oh no, because you were, and I think you remain, the most notable January 6th protester. And they were going to go after you for other reasons aside from your minor involvement in what happened that day, simply because you were, doing what you were doing with Walkaway. So, I so that is a sort of a funny aside, um, and you are joined by so many Americans who did not think they were doing anything wrong, exercising their constitutional rights, doing what other protesters had done as recently as 2018, the fall of 2018, in the Brett Kavanaugh protests that were in many ways far more dangerous and lasted a lot longer than 4 hours. So I so yes, that's how you and I connected, and I am just so happy to see you moving on and doing what you're doing and not being intimidated or cowed by what this regime, this government, and this court system is trying to do to you and
Well,
everyone
before we move
else.
to the speakers and start hearing people's personal stories, which we're going to do in just a minute, can you just kind of share with us? And I know it's not an easy question, and no one's expecting you to speak from a place of absolute certainty, but just in all of the research that you've done and all of the reporting that you've done, can you share with us, to the best of your ability, what you believe actually took place on January 6th, even if it's multiple things in multiple places?
I think for the most part, it was an inside job. It was an inside operation. And we see this now coming out not just in the testimony, the transcripts that are being released in the January 6th committee, which indicates by one of Nancy Pelosi's top staffers who said they started planning for the events of January 6th in the summer of 2020. We also see indications from DOJ, DHS, that they were in constant communications days before January 6th. Well, if the idea or the narrative is that all of the law enforcement and intelligence agencies were totally caught off guard that day, that Donald Trump incited the spontaneous insurrection because of his speech, what was everyone talking about months and weeks before January 6th? Furthermore, and as you know, Brandon, a lot of the backdrop here is what happened in the Whitmer we call Fednapping hoax, which was happening at the same time that we now know the FBI was running informants into the main so-called militia groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, again, months before January 6th. This is coming out in the trials. So, what I would always tell people and what I always suspected is once the trials started, to the extent that judges would allow it, and of course, they have not allowed a lot of this evidence presented in court or in discovery, that we would be finding out a lot of the same things that happened in the Whitmer Fednapping hoax at the same time were happening in preparation for January 6th. The biggest tell to me, and I'll let you take this somewhere else. 845-page January 6th Select Committee report. Christopher Wray's name is not mentioned one time. This committee, who's supposed to investigate January 6th, apparently did not interview the FBI director, nor did they interview Stephen D'Antuono, head of the Washington, D.C. FBI field office, which we also know from testimony was the repository of all of the FBI activity and intelligence about January 6th. They didn't interview him either. And he was the guy in charge of the Michigan FBI field office managing the key informant and supervising agents in the Whitmer Fednapping hoax. Like, you can't make this up. So to me, the Whitmer Fednapping hoax, knowing what this FBI is now capable of, especially the revelations in the Twitter files, all of this is piecing together. And people really have to take a second look. If they think what they saw on January 6th was legit, as you're watching this unfold on TV, taking a step back now 2 years later, knowing what we know about the FBI, the weaponization, the partisanship of that agency, what they did in Whitmer and in other events, we're now supposed to believe they had nothing to do with January 6th. It's just inconceivable.
Julie, in the J6 report from the J6 committee, I know that you know these things because you've studied the case, but does the report from the committee even tell the public, like, who broke the first window, the identity of the person who first started the violence, who broke the first window, who was the first person inside? Do we even know the answers to those questions after 2 years of this committee?
No, because the entire committee report, 8 chapters, focuses solely on Donald Trump. The legislative impetus for the committee, as they told the American people, would be to investigate the law enforcement and security failures leading up to that day. That section was relegated to an appendix at the end of the report, completely buried. And this has even raised some questions and skepticism on the left. Mother Jones last week posted an entire article saying, wait, we were supposed to be told what law enforcement, what all these police agencies, intelligence agencies didn't pick up before January 6th. And now it's buried at the end of the report. You didn't even interview the FBI director or the guy who was in charge of the most powerful FBI field office. And so it's even raising questions on the other side because stupidly, they thought in some regard this would be a legit investigation, which it wasn't. It was just another iteration of Russiagate, Robert Mueller, the impeachment proceedings. It was another Get Trump witch hunt that now, unfortunately, is ensnaring hundreds and potentially now up to 2,000 innocent Americans who were, lured into this trap.
Okay, so let's move on to our speakers tonight so we can start hearing stories. Julie, please stay with us as long as you can. Please come back later if you can. And as the speakers are sharing stories, please feel free to jump in at any point if you want to add context to anything anyone's saying or further information. And we thank you so much for being here. Why don't we start with Dr. Simone Gold? And what I would like to do is kind of go one by one and sort of establish why the various people who were on our panel tonight who were arrested, or in the case of Geri Perna, who's with us tonight, she's here representing her nephew, Matthew, who sadly was bullied to death by the DOJ and ended up taking his own life going through this process. So Geri's here with us tonight to share his story. What I would like to do is kind of go step by step and ask everybody, kind of first why they were there, and then go back again and ask everybody what their FBI raid experience was like, and then what happened after you were raided. So why don't we kind of start with just why were you there? Why were you in DC on January 6th? Dr. Gold, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you very much. And also, I do want to say thank you to Julie. Your work has been terrific, fantastic. Just the research that you put into your work just benefited everybody in the world, really. Thank you. And everyone's story, I think, is a little bit unique and different from everybody else's. Mine is particularly unusual, I suppose. For those of you who don't know me, I was a practicing emergency physician for more than 20 years when SARS-2 came to our shores, as well as all of the lockdowns. I'm also an attorney, and I started speaking out against the lockdowns and the propaganda and the censorship that was just sweeping our nation and the globe. And I founded America's Frontline Doctors. And because of all of the lies and the censorship and the fear that our government and media was stoking, and the fact that fear was causing people to kind of voluntarily give up their inalienable rights, I saw a tremendous threat to our nation, both from a physical perspective, that people were actually having their health and their lives threatened, and the social threat to take down our constitutional republic. For those reasons, I had an absolute duty and obligation to speak publicly. And I was speaking publicly as much as I possibly could since the initial White Coat Summit in July of 2020. I was heavily censored on social media, so I would really go to any large in-person gathering that I could. And that's what I was doing for many months prior to January 6th. The week of January 6th, I had 4 speaking engagements set, and one on January 3rd, January 5th, January 6th, and January 10th. So from my perspective, January 6th was really just another speaking engagement. I was excited about it because it was obviously a huge opportunity. As you know, I think there was over 1 million people in the Capitol that day. I didn't know what it would be before it got there, but I knew it would be huge. I knew for sure several 100,000. So I was an invited guest speaker. There was a section just to the east of the Capitol on the Capitol grounds called Section 8. About 20 people were invited to speak. There was a couple of incoming Congress people who were scheduled. I think perhaps Paul Gosar or Lauren Boebert. I don't remember exactly, but I was one of those scheduled speakers. We made our way from the ellipse to the designated place to speak. And when we arrived, we were in a kind of a Congo line, the speakers and some security in front and security behind us. And when we arrived at that location, we were told on the spot that all the speeches were canceled, which was highly shocking. And it was just shocking because there was tens of thousands of people at least on the east side, which is the less crowded side, but it was still very, very crowded. And what were the people supposed to do? It was a little bit like going to the Super Bowl stadium and there was no Super Bowl, the Super Bowl being canceled at the last moment with nothing to do. So we're just kind of standing around like, what are we supposed to do? There's tens of thousands of people here and I'm scheduled to speak. That was my mindset. Combined with, I just feel a tremendous urgency to speak the truth. I happen to speak on medical freedom issues, health freedom issues. Political speech is also protected, but I happen to not be there really to talk about politics or the election. Probably the only person there not talking about the election. But I was talking about something I think was in a way more important, which is our constitutional freedoms. So when I couldn't speak at the permitted place, I scampered up the steps and I started to speak. And that's how I found myself just in front of the East Side Rotunda, the East Side doors, the big, huge 20,000-pound steel doors on the East Side, top of the Capitol steps. That's why I was there. So that's a little bit of an unusual story, and I'm happy to stop there.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll definitely come back and pick back up on what happened perhaps inside and what happened to you next. We do have Nick Searcy with us tonight, everybody. Nick created a documentary called Capital Punishment, which is amazing. And if you haven't seen it, everyone should see it. Please, it's incredibly informative. And it's also incredibly just emotionally moving and powerful when you see I mean, literally, even things that blew my mind that I like army tanks from FBI agents rolling into people's yards to pull them out of their house in their underwear on, charges of going inside the building. Nick has not been thrown in prison yet, but nonetheless, he has a great story to share. So, Nick, thanks for being with us.
I'm working on it. I'm trying to get there. But yeah, thanks, Brandon. I went to January 6th, just kind of on my way back east to visit my parents. My friend said, let's just go see what it is. So I really didn't have any agenda in going there. I just sort of said, yeah, okay, I want to go experience that and see what happens, because it was, I thought, an event in history that I wanted to witness. And then after my experiences there, which were fairly, mundane, really. I did not even know that violence had gone on. I wound up on the side of the Capitol, between the Capitol building and the Supreme Court building, and I saw police move the barricades and motion people to come forward, and I saw people up on the steps sort of singing songs and waving flags, and I saw a lot of happy people. I saw people singing hymns and saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and it just, when I got home that night and I saw what was presented on the news, I didn't see any of that. I didn't see any of what they called the violence of that day, and so that is kind of what put me on the path of, like, I need to tell what I saw about this. I need to find out what really went on. And so as we made the film, we started talking to people like Derrick Kennison and Tony Martinez, who never went in the building and were there with first aid and sort of helped people that had been hit with grenades and hit with the flashbangs and had been injured by the police, and to see the way that they had been treated by the FBI like they were drug dealers or cartel leaders or serial killers. That these are people that have never been arrested for anything before in their lives, and suddenly there's armored vehicles coming down their suburban streets, SWAT team members with red dots on their chest, handcuffing their children. It was shocking to me as it went on. The more we shot, the more shocked I became at the treatment of American citizens by what Julie rightly called a real setup. And so the really sad thing about it, and I'll end with this, I'm going to make a sequel because a lot of the people that we talked to in my first film are now reporting to prison, are now being, they're going to jail for a man that we're talking to this week is going to jail for, he was convicted of 4 misdemeanors and he's serving 8 months in federal prison. This is a Marine veteran that has never been arrested for anything before in his life. 8 months in prison for trespassing and parading. This is not ending. These people are going to continue to push this narrative. They have announced that they're going to try to arrest another 1,000 people in the next few months that were there on January 6th. So this is not a story that's over. They are going to continue to oppress and intimidate people who went there on January 6th because the narrative is working for them. They see it as working for them. They think electorally it's benefiting them to demonize people who went to Washington on January 6th. So I feel like it's a calling for me that I have to continue to tell the story. And so I'm gonna keep doing it.
Well, and we thank you so much for doing that, because honestly, if every conservative person in a position of power was doing what you were doing, we wouldn't be in this position. It's the fact that there's been little to no pushback from the right side of the aisle that is allowing them to believe that it's a great idea to go arrest 1,000 more people and to keep this going and to destroy more lives.
And if I may say one more thing, Brandon, I think that's what the fight in the House of Representatives has been about this week. So much. It's like nobody on the Republican side is fighting for these people. And that is why we are all so furious. And that is why we don't want another Speaker of the House who will not do anything to stop the oppression that's going on.
The movie is Capital Punishment. That's Nick Searcy's documentary. Nick, please tell people, and keep telling them throughout the night while you're here, how can they watch your movie?
Easiest place to go is capitalpunishment.locals.com. That's also my locals page, nicksearcy.locals.com. You can also find the movie at hisglory.tv.
Okay.
Those are the two places right now.
Okay, great. So you don't have to like shamelessly plug yourself. I'll just keep asking you that like 1,000 times tonight, and you just keep okay.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to move now to Geri Perna, and then we'll go to John Strand, and then we'll go to Derrick. Geri, once again, is here tonight speaking on behalf of her nephew, Matthew Perna, who's no longer with us. So, Geri, do you want to kind of start off by just telling us your summation of why Matt was in D.C. on January 6th? And please feel free to share anything else, how this has affected you, your family throughout, while you're speaking. Oh, sorry. This is Geri's first space. Geri, in your lower left, you'll have click the mute button to turn your mic on. Sorry about that. I should have told you that. There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, like so many Americans that went to January 6th that day, my nephew Matt went because he thought it was going to be a celebration of historic proportions. He thought for sure that Mike Pence was not going to certify the election, and there was going to be basically a celebration in the street. And of course, we all know that is not what happened. Prior to January 6th, Matt led a very full life. He was very active in his community. He was a successful businessman. He traveled the world extensively. He was brilliant. He read constantly. He graduated near the top of his class from Penn State University and never had a parking ticket prior to January 6th. So when he went, we're not talking about an individual who has violent tendencies or is a fighter in any way. He just wasn't that way. He was a very laid back kind of guy, very kind. And he went to the Capitol and got caught up in the crowd. And basically, was in a crowd of people pushing behind him, in front of him, and went through an open door. He was in the Capitol 10 minutes, recording with his cell phone, and stayed within the velvet ropes. He never ventured anywhere else in the Capitol. He didn't touch anything or break anything. And he went out the back door. And then, as we all know, his picture ended up on the FBI website about a week later, and Matt turned himself in. That very morning that he found out his picture was on there, he called the local FBI, and he told them what had happened. And they basically said, well, if we have any more questions, we'll let you know. Well, I was in Florida at the time. I didn't like the sound of it. I said, I'm flying home, and I did. And we retained an attorney at that point. And lo and behold, the FBI called and said they had a few more questions, and they called from the driveway, actually. And by the time we walked in the house, they were already arresting Matt, and they took him to the local FBI office in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and they released him 3 hours later with stipulations. He wasn't allowed to leave the state. He wasn't allowed to travel anywhere. He had to check in with a parole officer. And at the beginning, he was charged with the misdemeanors, parading and whatever else they were. They were minor misdemeanors. And then a couple weeks later, that's when they charged Matt along with 240 other patriots with the charge of obstruction of an official proceeding, which was a felony. And that's when the worry really set in. And his hearings were constantly delayed and postponed. He would get himself mentally prepared for one, only to have them cancel it an hour before. And sometimes it was canceled for up to a month. And they kept saying that they were still working on discovery. And I kept saying, well, that's because they haven't discovered anything on him. So the time was passing and Matt was growing more and more anxious, and his mental state was declining rapidly. He used to be an avid runner. That was one of the things he loved to do. He was a very health conscious person, and he basically gave that all up because he just didn't matter to him anymore. So he was back and forth for plea deals, and they never once budged on anything with the charges. They wouldn't drop anything. And Matt asked his attorney, I need to get this over with. I have to move on with my life. And his attorney told him the fastest way for it to be over would be to plead guilty, and that he would be looking at 6 to 12 months in a federal prison camp. Matt had never had a parking ticket prior to this. He had turned himself in, and he was a part-time caregiver for his dad, who was ill. And so Matt, by the advice of his attorney, he pled guilty, and his sentencing hearing was scheduled for March the 3rd. And a week before, the Monday before, Matt was very anxious about March the 3rd, because March the 3rd was in fact the anniversary of his mother's death. And he had a very bad feeling about this sentencing taking place on that date. And he called his attorney, and his attorney basically told him, well, I've got bad news. The same attorney that kept saying 6 to 12 months, 6 to 12 months, don't worry, I've got this, all of a sudden tells him that the DOJ was looking to add a sentencing enhancement, and that would increase his sentence to possibly 4 to 6 years. Matt called me, and he was just sobbing hysterically on the phone, and he could hardly speak. And I kept trying to encourage him and telling him, don't worry, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. And he had a lot of faith in God. He read his Bible front to back, I don't know how many times. In the course of that 13 months, I think he read through the Bible several times, just looking for answers. He was so desperate and so distraught. And that Friday, February 25th, my brother called me in the evening and told me I needed to fly home to Pennsylvania because Matt had just hung himself in his garage. I can't even put into words my reaction. Even now, and just thinking about it just makes me cry. I cry every day. We miss him like you can't even imagine. I don't even know how we got through the holidays. It was horrible. I couldn't wait to rip the Christmas decorations down. I didn't want to look at them another day. And here we are now, 2 years later, the day that ruined my nephew's life and destroyed our family. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Geri. Thank you so much. Why don't we just, for the moment, leave it there, and then we're going to come back, and I want to ask you more specifically about the process Matt was going through. I know this is really painful, and I'm not trying to torture Geri. The whole purpose of this conversation is to illuminate for everybody listening what everybody has been through, and why Matt made the choice that he did, and why he's not the only one, and people need to know this. So I'm not trying to torture you, but I want to ask more questions about what Matt went through. Yeah.
Okay.
In the meantime, why don't we go to John Strand? John, if you could tell us a little, tell us your story. But why were you in DC, and tell us a little bit about, what brought you to the Capitol?
Sure, Brandon. Thank you. Geri, thank you for sharing. I'm really just awestruck by the intensity of that suffering, and by your just authenticity and sharing that with us. Wow. Um, the the reason that I'm so passionate about participating in this conversation and in this effort is because of the enormity and severity of what you just heard Geri share. Um, and there's a lot of people that have suffered really intensely because of this. The reason I personally was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, um, is closely tied to Dr. Gold's story that most of you have probably heard on this space previously. But before I got to January 6th, I was actually starting to get involved in activism and rallies, which was a totally new thing for me, because my background is I'm an artist, so I was a model and actor and musician and these various things in Los Angeles for many years. And I basically avoided politics because it wasn't politically or it wasn't something you got involved in if you wanted to have a career in Hollywood. I had my beliefs and opinions, and I've always held true to those, but I wasn't publicly political for most of my life. But when the lockdowns started happening in 2020, I felt like God was calling me to be more vocal about basic things, human rights and so forth. And so I started getting involved in that conversation, and was involved in leading a rally in Los Angeles, 3,000 miles away from Washington, D.C., that became very well known and successful. In fact, Brandon came and brought Walkaway there. We had thousands of people in L.A. Taking to the streets in support of freedom, in support of human rights. It wasn't really about President Trump or politics per se. It was more basic than that. But that's how I kind of got involved in the scene generally, and then got connected with the work of Dr. Gold and America's Frontline Doctors. And so because of all of those activities in recent years, I was in January 6th because I was working full-time for America's Frontline Doctors, and I was providing security and other services for Dr. Gold while she was doing her job. So that's what brought me to Washington, D.C. on J6. Was if it was not for my professional obligation in doing my job, which I take very seriously, I would not have been in DC. I would have actually been hosting a Stop the Steal rally in Los Angeles, or I would have been hosting my own rally. But Stop the Steal was just the hashtag of the month, during that period. So. I certainly have my opinions about politics. I certainly have my opinions about the 2020 election, which was a total travesty, obviously, in many ways. But I wasn't in DC on January 6th because of the 2020 election or Stop the Steal. I was simply in Washington, DC on January 6th to do my job. And my job was to protect someone named Dr. Gold, who was an invited guest speaker of a permitted rally. So from my perspective, that's what I was there for, and that's what I did. And my experience was pretty similar to what you heard Nick Searcy mention, which was that, there were a ton of people everywhere, and it was chaotic, and it's sometimes disorganized, but generally it was positive, and a rally with a lot of people of a pretty similar mind that wanted to share their opinion and express their support for certain people and or principles. Particularly the principles, and that's what brought me there, and that's how I, comported myself in terms of my actions on that day.
And to be clear, John, you basically didn't really leave her side that day, right? It's not like you two were ever apart.
I there's barely even a moment when I wasn't physically touching her. There's an enormous amount of video evidence of this day, on many people, but particularly Dr. Gold and myself being close to the Capitol and inside of it for 45 minutes. We were videotaped, from 100 angles for most of the entire experience. So yeah, if you want to know what I actually did and where I actually was, it's not hard to find out. And I was barely ever, not even holding my hands around, her side, making sure that she stayed upright and safe. So that's what I was doing.
Okay, thank you. And when we go back around in a moment, because I'm going to kind of pick back up from the moment where people actually went inside the Capitol, and I'll let her pick up the story from there. But before we do, Derrick Evans is with us. I met Derrick recently, actually, I think in a Twitter space. And he's a great guy. His story is amazing. What he's been through is beyond horrific. Including what he's currently going through on probation, which we'll get to a little later in this space. But Derrick, please tell us why were you in DC?
Awesome. Well, first of all, Brandon, thank you so much for putting this on and having us all here. And thank you, Dr. Gold, for all your incredible work in the health freedom thing. I think it's safe to say almost everybody who cares about health freedom has been following you for a while, and just really appreciate all of that. I went to DC for a couple reasons, but most the real reason, I guess, is, I've just been elected to the West Virginia State House. And before that, though, I just want to say I wasn't a politician. I was somebody who did show up to events on a regular basis, big events. I would live stream them. And that's kind of why I decided to run for office to begin with. And then I won that race. And all that matters because my wife was 9 months pregnant. I just came out of the campaign. I really wasn't planning to go, believe it or not. I wanted to go. It's something I normally would have went to. But on this particular situation, I was actually going to stay home just because of the timing of everything. But I had so many constituents in my area who were so concerned about, and I agreed with them in terms of the stolen election. And I saw the thing from Trump, just saying, hey, people's coming to D.C. It's going to be, a wild day. And so I thought, I ran and said I wasn't going to be a normal politician, if that makes sense. And I'd signed all these petitions like everybody else, but deep down I knew it wasn't going to do anything, didn't mean anything. It was just all for political show, and we all knew that. And so part of this, honestly, is I felt an obligation to my constituents who had trusted me and believed in me enough to represent them and to speak up for them. So that was a big part of, I guess, what pushed me over the hump. Like I said, I wanted to go, but that was the reason I decided to go. Ultimately, what was to go there and to peacefully and patriotically exercise my natural God-given rights to free speech. And that's what I did that day. I showed up, and as Brandon has eloquently said in other spaces, I wasn't there going there to overthrow the government or to ask them to overturn the election. I was going there for the sole purpose of asking them what has been done in the past, which is to send the certification back to the states, allow them to investigate that, and then after that 10 days, make the decision to do that or not.
So you didn't bring your flagpole to murder people, is what you're saying?
Absolutely. I did not go there to do anything violent. I didn't partake in any of those things. Look, I wish that big tech hadn't censored all of us for not only the thousands of tens of thousands of hours of video footage. Quite frankly, that's probably been deleted and deleted evidence. But also, I had tweets out there leading up to January 6th where people would ask questions. Hey, is it possible to overturn the election on January 6th? And I had explicitly stated and described, no, that's not how this process works. We are going there to ask them to send this back to the state. So I had clear evidence that I wasn't going there to, quote unquote, attempt to overthrow the government or overturn the election. But as we all know, I got deplatformed with everybody else, I think January 8th. So I wasn't able to use that in my defense. And but I wish I would have been able to, because it would have shown clear motive that I was going there that day to ask them to do their, in my opinion, constitutional duty of not certifying an election that there was just a lot of questions, and still are a lot of questions surrounding potential widespread election fraud. So that's why I went that day.
Thank you. One thing I think is fascinating, too, is that lately there's been so much talk and rhetoric about how Mike Pence never could have not certified the election on January 6th. Especially the Democrats say, he never had the power to do it. It couldn't be done. Everyone's saying that. And I think, well, then how on earth could it be an insurrection? I mean, if you're basically admitting that this was ceremonial and nothing more, then how on earth could anyone have overthrown Joe Biden becoming president? Because you're admitting it's just ceremonial. Anyhow, let's please move back to Dr. Gold. Dr. Gold, could you, to whatever degree you're comfortable, tell us, how did you end up inside the Capitol and why, and what happened when you were in there, if you're comfortable sharing?
Hold on. Thank you. I just had to put my microphone on. Yes. First of all, thank you for doing the spaces. It's actually incredibly helpful and lovely to hear everybody's stories. I was at the top of the Capitol steps. As I had explained, I felt tremendous urgency to speak on these health freedom issues, both because really a lot of people still didn't know the truth, that there was early treatment that worked, and I felt that. And then again, the constitutional republic. So I was standing there at the top of the Capitol steps, actually giving my speech, which sounds crazy now because it was a tremendously crowded environment. No one could really hear me. After about a minute or so, I stopped speaking. And then myself and John were standing there at very close to the front when somehow the doors miraculously swung open. And when I say miraculously, I guess I should say mysteriously swung open. Julie probably is a person who knows more about this than anyone else, as you've said. But despite all of my research, could not find any proof of how or why those doors were open. So on the east side where we were, there's these heavy 20,000 pound steel doors that cannot open without somebody opening them. Somehow those got opened. No human could have opened them. And then just inside of that were other doors that also needed to be opened by, some type of computerized or locking mechanism that a person couldn't breach. So they were definitely swung open from the inside. I know that because I was standing there and I could see that. So it was nobody on the outside. There were other people on the inside, and somehow it opened. When those doors opened, I and John were swept inside with the crowd. There were thousands and thousands of people behind us on the steps and in the whole area. Brandon, you weren't even that far away. You know how many people were there. It was just packed. And had I not wanted to go in, it wouldn't have been possible. But we went in like other people did, and there's tons of video. One of the oddest things about this whole experience is that these alleged crimes that we're all being accused of, the entire event is all on videotape. So you can literally see what people are saying is this thing that the government is charging you with. And all you see is we're swept in the building, and then we are walking around just like the other speaker said about her nephew. We were inside the ropes like tourists, and we're kind of looking around. And once you're inside, why were we there? I mean, I planned to do a public speech that day. I didn't plan to be walking around inside the Capitol. The whole day went sideways. But while inside, we were peaceful and respectful. For me personally, as an attorney, I find it very awe-inspiring to be in the Capitol, to be in Statuary Hall. For me, it's very meaningful, the history and our founding fathers and on these great people who brought such tremendous wisdom to the founding of our nation. And it's very meaningful to me. While there, we kind of wandered wherever the crowd wandered. I personally, I know, John, I think I'm speaking for you as well, we really did not know where we were. I mean, the last time I was in Statuary Hall, I'm sure, was a decade or even decades ago, or in the Capitol, I should say. And that's where we were. And we were there many minutes. And eventually I thought it was a good idea. I think it was John's idea. I can't remember, to give my speech. So that's what I did. So some of you may have seen video of me giving my speech, and the speech is really all about constitutional freedom, health freedom, your right to have sovereignty over your own body, that's an inalienable right. And that's what I did. And there's plenty of videotape of me doing that. And then we walked on wherever the crowd went, and I gave the speech again. And this time you can see me speaking. You can hear me. You have a video of it. And that picture was captured, and it was featured in the Washington Post about 4 days after January 6th. I made no effort to hide the fact that I was there. Much like Geri's nephew, when I saw that the FBI was looking for me, I wasn't hiding myself. I wasn't going to say I wasn't there when I was there. And what I was there to do was to give a speech, and that's what I did. And you can see walking right behind me, looking entirely bored, are police officers walking behind me. And that was the first time police officers approached me, and they asked me to leave as I'm giving the speech. And I kind of looked at him, and then we walked on. And that was it. That was our experience in the Capitol. We waited a long time to get out, probably 20 or 25 minutes, because there were still so many people pouring in the building. You couldn't actually walk out of the building. And that was it. On where we were was not violent. It was like Nick Searcy's experience. We had seen people singing and kumbaya and grandmothers and moms, and we didn't see the violence that they showed on YouTube and etc. And I found out, as we all know, they were simply suppressing all of the videos and all of the pictures and all of the evidence of what was mostly very, very peaceful. All the experiences of people like us were simply not heard. So the people that weren't there were only hearing about the pockets of difficult places, right? And that's the part that I resent. That's the part that I speak out against, is the suppression of free speech. I don't believe any of us were saying, when you see the video evidence of some violence, right? We weren't denying that that happened, but they were denying that all the peacefulness that we saw ever happened. And therefore that set the stage to charge really very law-abiding people with violent crimes. But that was our experience.
Thank you very much. And you touched on something that I want for us to kind of explore as we go through this space tonight, which is nuance, the nuance of January 6th. Because again, because of any of the media kind of on the center, or certainly over toward the right, the majority of media went completely silent and was not even interested in talking to people with misdemeanor charges, people with nonviolent charges. And therefore, there's been this like runaway train of the narrative of January 6th, which has been absolutely carried by the most extreme left-wing narrative of what took place on January 6th. And because of that, every person who got caught up in this, I mean, I often say, like, somewhat facetiously, but not really that facetiously, like if you threw a gum wrapper on the ground on January 6th and you got a citation for littering, it would be your role in the insurrection, that you were arrested for your role in the insurrection. And you're like, well, my role was littering. But there's been absolutely no nuance. And because this is so politicized, I mean, it's really, let's be honest, it's the left versus Trump supporters. Nobody wants to take a moment and acknowledge, okay, some people did some really bad things on January 6th. Some people broke windows. Some people assaulted police officers. But you know what? Some people kind of got swept up in a moment, or didn't even have a choice really about going inside, went inside, took some pictures and left. And I think that labeling these people terrorists and insurrectionists and expecting them to shoulder the same amount of burden as people who engaged in egregious acts of violence or destruction is really horrible. And so I hope that tonight we can create a little bit of nuance for people to understand that, yes, just because you've read horrible stories about a lot of us because we were charged, it's not exactly what you think. And
may I add one thing
please.
on that, Brandon? It's that there was an investigator, I guess his name is Jason Sullivan, and he did a deep dive into all the media suppression. This is the story that has to get out. We are not saying that there were not things that happened that were wrong. But what we are protesting is the hundreds of thousands of people who are being maligned as having done something wrong, because you're not hearing and seeing all of their video evidence and all of their pictures and all of their statements, because they were actively suppressed on social media. All the people that had those pictures in their cell phones of happy times, cheerful times, positive times, nonviolent times, all of that was hidden from your eyes. I remember that night when we left, we didn't know anything really bad had happened. We went off to dinner and we didn't even think that much of it. And the next day, because I didn't have any television on, people were saying this was a terrible thing, an insurrection thing. And I remember being shocked. What are you talking about? My experience was like Nick Searcy's. I didn't know anything really bad had happened because I didn't have the TV on. And I just want to throw that out for you. For those of you who weren't there, it was overwhelmingly, most of the area, certainly on the east side, there was not the violence that you were being told it was. Thank you.
And Brandon, if I could jump in here just for a second, that is the point. They don't want to show any nuance. They want to smear everybody that went there, because what they're trying to do is demonize anybody that dares to stand up and say, we don't think the election was on the up and up, and we think there should be an investigation into it. So they don't want it. They suppress that purposely, because they don't want the idea that there were decent Americans who believe in the Constitution who were simply there showing their support. They want to paint everybody that went there as some sort of a criminal.
That's absolutely right. And I've said this many times before. I'll say it again. To me, it really illustrates one of the key differences between our side and their side. And I'm sorry, because I don't want to do like the division thing tonight, but I have to point out that if this was a situation where it was the reverse, and it was overwhelmingly an Antifa mob that had attacked a government building or engaged in some sort of violent riot. And, you know, anyone who knows me knows I don't have any positive feelings about the Antifa or movement. I think that anybody who would join Antifa probably has a screw loose. Nonetheless, if the Trump administration was going around rounding up, thousands of Antifa people, and some of those Antifa people were saying, yeah, I was there when that stuff was happening, but I didn't do it, like I was not involved in that, I would not want those people to be prosecuted. My attitude would not be, well, you're Antifa, so screw you, go to jail and lock you up and throw away the key, give them the gas chamber. I'd be like, no, like there should be appropriate justice for what people actually did, and there should be nuance to the situation. If you're somebody I don't like and you were present at a violent event, but you didn't engage in that, I don't want to see you suffer, and I don't want to see you prosecuted. But that is not the attitude that we're receiving from the other side. Can I take a moment to just say, could everyone please tweet out this space? We have a really great audience, but let's try to get 2-3 times as many people in here to hear these stories. Please just take a second, share the room, encourage your audience to come inside and listen. Geri, are you able to share with us any of Matt's impressions when he went inside, what his experience was like when he was inside? And remember, you have to unmute on the lower left.
Okay, when Matt went inside, prior to going inside, he was amazed at the crowd, and the picture that was painted afterward was not what he had witnessed himself. He said the crowd was very kumbaya-ish. He was the term he used, and he was also very amazed at the diversity of the crowd. They like to paint the Trump supporters as a bunch of white supremacists and racists, and that simply wasn't the case. Every nationality, I believe, was probably represented that day. He did a video after getting back to his hotel, and it's actually on our website, rememberingmattperna.com. One of his friends had the wherewithal to download the video before Facebook deleted it. And the video just surfaced about 6 or 8 months ago. She posted it on Facebook, and I was so grateful for that, because we thought the video was lost forever since they deleted his Facebook account and confiscated his phone and everything. But the video clearly shows the demeanor of Matt and his friends in their hotel room after this alleged insurrection. I mean, you would think that people who were charged with these horrendous crimes would be acting like they just won the Super Bowl, and they would be hyped up and just, high-fiving and everything. That wasn't the case at all. And you can view the video yourself on the website. Matt is very calm, cool, and collected. But toward the end of the video, there's a couple of sentences which they used against him later. And one of the sentences was that Mike Pence proved himself to be a traitor. And then he says, but don't worry, this isn't over yet. Well, they took those lines out of context, of course, and they used it as evidence against him that he was promoting terrorism. And the fact of the matter was, the way the words were said in the video were very calm and cool, but the way they were presented, it's kind of like a text message. You don't know how it's sent, how it's spoken when somebody sends it to you. Is it sarcastic? Is it pleasant? Is it mean? So they used this against him in the end. But I mean, you can tell his demeanor in that video. He was not somebody who felt like he just witnessed something worse than 9/11. He was just so calm and cool and collected. And what he meant by this isn't over yet is Matt believed in his heart that the audits would take place and the true results of the election would be revealed and the election results would be overturned. And that's what he meant by it. But they used those words against him. But like I said, if you view the video, you will see what he was like just minutes after leaving the rally. And it's just not what they've painted him to be at all. And that's probably why they took the video down, because they didn't want people to hear the truth and to see his demeanor and the way he carried himself.
So I just want to I want to jump in there, Brandon, just for 2 seconds. So everyone listening, take note of what Geri's saying. People were getting convicted for words that are just ordinary words. He said something like, "This is not over yet," and this is essentially what becomes a conviction, because you are facing a DC jury that was 100% poisoned against us and citizens. Just, this is very, very chilling what you just said, Geri, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's an incredibly important point.
Thank you.
Yeah, and please feel free to jump in at any time. We're kind of going in order as we're telling the stories, but if you want to make comments on what other people said, please feel free to do that. And
Yeah, I'd like to jump in
please
for a
do.
second,
Yes.
Brandon, because there's Easton Cantwell, who's a man who's profiled in my movie in Capital Punishment. One of the things that they convicted him for was saying, "We need more help up here." Now, they said that was him inciting them to riot. When what he really was just saying is, like, there's a lot of stuff going on up here and we need some people to help. But they made that seem like he's some sort of, crazed terrorist. And, what Simone said and what Geri said is exactly right. They're taking just ordinary common speech and twisting it into some horrible exhortation to violence, which is nothing could be further from the truth.
Nick, that's actually the point I was going to, sorry, just really quickly, that's the point I was going to make too, is I don't know a single January 6th defendant yet that I've spoken to who did not have that experience. And to validate the point that Dr. Gold made and that Geri made, my entire 8 minutes that I was outside the Capitol is on video. So, everything about my case, like literally my entire involvement in January 6th is on video and can be viewed by people. And one of the things that they used against me was that in my charging documents and kind of the summation of my case, they were saying, Straka approached the Capitol and was saying, we're going in. Well, if you watch my video, what you see is that there's a man at the top of the steps and he's shouting down, "They've opened the doors. We're going inside. We're going in. And I literally repeat verbatim what he said. Like, it's 100% obvious that I am just repeating for my audience the exact words that he said. They removed that context and just made it sound like I was saying that. And like I was like leading a charge with a torch in my hand.
But if I can jump in, if you're seen on video numerous times wearing a MAGA hat, imploring people to go into the Capitol, and you're standing in a big group on January 5th telling people to go inside the Capitol, and you're directing traffic on January 6th telling people to go inside the Capitol, and you're on restricted grounds for over an hour that day, and you just happen to be at the initial breach point, and you happen to whisper in the ear of Ryan Samsel, who's a January 6th defendant who breached the first physical exterior perimeter of the Capitol. If you do all of that and you text to your family later on that you helped orchestrate what happened that day, not only are you not charged, you are defended by the very same January 6th propagandists, including House Democrats and the media, as just a nice guy who is trying to ease the situation. And you're not an insurrectionist somehow. You are the only hero who's at the Capitol grounds on January 6th.
Does this mean you're back with us, Julie?
Yes. Hi.
Yay. Did you already do your Larry Elder?
Larry
O'Connor. I'm sorry. Well, I still stand by what I said about Larry Elder because he's been amazing. He's had me on to tell my J6 story numerous times. Julie, great. I'm glad you're back. Thank you. John Strand, pick up the baton, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to notice the common theme here, which is just an unbelievable amount of dishonesty. I'm glad that you mentioned nuance, Brandon, and obviously that's missing from this. But I think even more than nuance is just the fact that everything that's going on with the J6 situation is just incredibly dishonest. The entire thing is just a gigantic lie that's being constructed and weaponized in the obvious ways. And Dr. Gold is mentioning the impact of censorship by restricting the ability of so many people to offer context or nuance additional information because it was censored, because it didn't fit the intended direction and objective of the event. Also, Julie Kelly has done an incredible job of exposing the government's involvement. They are implied in this. They are they have serious culpability. So as much as we are trying to understand the full breadth of what happened with nuance, and obviously we recognize that certain individuals, yes, committed illegal acts and so forth. So we're not denying that happened, but we're trying to understand, what is this situation exactly? What is it really? Where's it coming from? Where's it going? It's going in a very bad direction, driven by very bad people. Brandon, I don't know if anyone else on here has gone to trial. Is that an experience or a story that anyone else has shared?
I believe we've all taken plea deals, including Derrick.
So I wanted to share an aspect of so I went to trial, and a lot of interesting and profound things happened. But one of the immediate takeaways was the breathtaking dishonesty of the entire experience. It was shocking. They didn't just try to suggest that, I was physically there, which yes, I was. Technically I broke some law, which they were going to try to punish me for, which legally speaking, I still have actually a defense and an argument against that, but be that as it may, that isn't what they were doing. They were trying to not just suggest, but, preach. They were trying to shout from the rooftops with all of this moral indignation that I was this horrific, evil terrorist person, just overwhelming with intention and hate to lead a terrorist charge to destroy the government and democracy. It was just unbelievable. The position that they took and the quote unquote evidence that they suggested was proving their point. Evidence, which, by the way, was actually quite exculpatory if you were honest in reviewing it. And the entire experience was just the most disingenuous, dishonest, disgusting thing I'd ever experienced in my life. And that's if I took myself out of it and was just looking at it third hand, objectively. Unbelievable.
I just want to jump in here because, Brandon, you were giving everyone the opportunity to hear facts that they haven't heard elsewhere. So there was... John is right. The range, the breadth and depth of the government dishonesty absolutely shocked me. Even having been through this now for a year and a half and watching as an attorney, all of our rights that didn't exist. You couldn't be seen by a lawyer when you were in jail because of quote unquote COVID restrictions. You couldn't have a speedy trial. I mean, just rights being abridged on the right and on the left. But still, when John went to trial, and we were there, the prosecutors were actually lying in very specific ways. The one sticking point, and Julie, you might find this very, very interesting. So in my trial, I had said from the very beginning, when I first met my criminal defense attorney, when she asked me what happened, and I walked them through slowly everything about that day. One thing that stood out in my mind is when we were standing there outside the East Side doors, a little bit away from us, maybe 10 feet or so away, there was an officer who was making his way through the crowd. He was trying to get away from the crowd because obviously he was very outnumbered. Julie could speak more eloquently to why the police were so outnumbered, but it wasn't anything violent, but he was outnumbered. So he was doing the sensible thing, which is really trying to leave. But as everyone on this call knows, we are essentially a crowd that backs the police, back the police, back the blue, back the blue. He was trying to leave. Nobody was assaulting him. Nobody was bothering him, but it was a little while to get through. But I could see that he looked like he was going to faint. I could see it because of my professional training as an emergency physician. And I kind of looked at him, and he looked like he was going to faint. And he was maybe 10 feet away from me, but there was probably 15 people between me and him, like sardines. We were packed. And eventually he did kind of faint. And as soon as he went down, the crowd chanted, "Get him up, get him up, get him up, get him up." And I remember very clearly they clapped, "Get him up, get him up." And within about 5 seconds, He was back up on his feet. The crowd kind of helped him up. And he was, of course, uninjured. And he kind of walked off, and that was the end of it. And it was just a little, moment of the day. But as I was telling my criminal defense attorney about that day, I happened to mention that thing had, that was one of the things and aspects of that day. Much, much later, a year later, 2 months later, as I'm facing the nightmare of having to take a plea deal or not, this episode came up again, and she said the government was trying to say that the guy was assaulted, that the cop was assaulted. And I said, he wasn't assaulted, he fainted. I saw him, I could see that he fainted. She said, no, well, they're trying to say he was assaulted. So, well, he wasn't assaulted. And this kept going back and forth. And I'm just like, but he wasn't assaulted. He wasn't assaulted. And that's kind of how it was, right? Then we go off to John's, and the prosecution kept saying he was assaulted. And I go off to my sentencing, and the prosecutor in my case makes a big deal about the fact that this police officer was assaulted, and I did nothing to help. And I'm an emergency physician, and I did nothing to help this poor police officer that was assaulted. And my mouth is hanging open for so many reasons. One is, it was a sentencing hearing. Why are you presenting quote-unquote evidence at a sentencing hearing when there's no opportunity to cross-examine? The prosecution and the judge were simply like together agreeing to show evidence at a sentencing hearing, which I thought was absolutely out of bounds. Number two, there was no assault, so there was no need for any help. And number three, had there been any need for aid, I was not within ability to reach him anyway, unless I magically developed the power of flight. I could fly over 15 people. But that's how that went. When it came time for John's trial a few months later, that particular officer takes the stand. And what does he swear to? He attests on the stand that, in fact, he was walking through the crowd, and it was very crowded, he got lightheaded, and he fainted. He fainted. It was the same thing I had said to my own defense attorney a year and a half earlier. And this particular officer who attests that he fainted, he had said that a few days after January 6th as well. So his story never changed. A few days after January 6th, he fainted in the crowd. On the stand, he said he fainted. I told my criminal defense attorney he fainted. And yet, in my case, they kept saying that I was near an officer who was assaulted and I didn't help. And I'm shocked at the level of deception and lies that our government engages in. We have nothing in this nation if the prosecution doesn't see their role as pursuing justice. It is not as though they're supposed to be pursuing convictions. We need our prosecutors to be pursuing justice. It's not the same job as being a criminal defense attorney who needs to advocate fiercely and aggressively for one person, the criminal defendant. The prosecution has all the weight of the government behind it, and therefore it should not be on the side of a conviction or an acquittal. It needs to be on the side of justice. Those days are gone. Everything I saw in the past 2 years has convinced me that the government is solely interested in convictions and not at all interested in justice. And there were many, many examples like that, but I want you to remember just that specific one because the facts were so blatant. Thank you.
It's even worse than that, though, because they're not just interested in convictions with J6. They're interested in punishment. They're interested in destroying people. So generally, I agree with Dr. Gold that the justice system has lost all of its moral boundaries. It's lost sight of what its purpose is to pursue justice. And there's a lot of people in jobs that just a conviction is a victory. It's points. It's like scoring a basket in basketball. But this is much more than that. It's much worse than that. It's much more evil than that. It is much more deceptive and destructive than that. These people are lying, cheating, stealing, killing, destroying with the purpose of punishing and destroying people and absolutely tyrannizing them with fear and intimidation so that they will never even think about questioning or pushing back or raising a hand or asking a question or having a different opinion ever again. That's the point.
Julie, were you going to? Yeah, go ahead. And then don't forget, poor
So-
Derrick hasn't gotten a chance to tell his story inside the Capitol, so we'll go to him next.
The real unsung villains in all of this are the judges on the DC District Court. They have acted as nothing more than a rubber stamp for this Department of Justice. And we're talking about Republican appointed judges, including Trump judges like Tim Kelly, Trevor McFadden, all the way down through Obama, Clinton appointees, and even Reagan appointees. They actually are the ones who are responsible for making sure that they are defending the rights of the accused, that they are making sure that their due process rights are protected, that the government does not run roughshod, does not play games, does not withhold discovery of Brady material, does not unfairly delay trials, etc. That's not happening. The judges really are the villains here because they are signing off on bogus charges, whether it's obstruction of an official proceeding, seditious conspiracy, parading in the Capitol, a low level petty offense, which Beryl Howell, who is the chief judge of the DC District Court, said before January 6th, they never even dealt with something like a Class B misdemeanor petty offense. The judges are the real problem here. And there's not really much that you could do to overcome that. Every single judge has denied every single change of venue motion. There is no way in hell that any Trump supporter should stand trial in the District of Columbia, a city that voted 93% for Joe Biden, that has open contempt for Donald Trump and his supporters. But they've denied every change of venue motion. They are the ones who are holding nonviolent offenders under pretrial detention. They are the ones who are allowing these charges, who are allowing DOJ to get away with whatever they are, whatever they want to, really. So that is in my reporting. Unfortunately, I can't get to all of it. But look, you had a judge this week, Reggie Walton, a 73-year-old judge on the DC District Court, berating a woman who pleaded guilty to berating her. What has Trump done to make your life so great? Why did you support Donald Trump? Why did you put your life on the line for Donald Trump? This is a federal judge berating a woman, by the way, whose co-defendant killed himself last summer instead of face prison time, which the same judge threatened him that he would. This is the sort of thing that's happening in the court system in Washington, D.C. So, yes, the prosecutors, and I've seen all of the lies, I've seen all of the falsehoods that they put in federal filings. They can only get away with it with the imprimatur of these judges on the D.C. District Court.
Thank you, Julie. I want to go to Derrick. He's the only one who hasn't had a chance yet to share what his experience was like going inside the Capitol and what he actually did and what he was accused of. And then kind of for the next round of conversation, I want to talk about what happened next in your lives, your FBI raids, finding out what your charges were, and what the media reporting on your case was like, what your life was like in your towns and your communities, everything that basically happened when the FBI got involved in your life and what happened after. Derrick, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you again, Brandon, for hosting this. And before I get into my story, I just want to thank you so much, Julie. You are saying so many of the things that, quite frankly, most January 6th defendants can't say, or even those of us who are on probation can't say right now. And just, I really appreciate your courage and willingness to say a lot of these things on our behalf. It's amazing because I was on the east side as well, and from what I'm gathering, I think all of us were on the east side of the building that day. So it's just crazy to think, of all those thousands of people there, we were all probably pretty close to each other on that day at one point or another. Just like Dr. Gold, I walked through the east doors there, the big Columbus doors. I don't know, they're huge. I can't say I got swept up into the crowd. I did walk inside. I wasn't going there with any bad intentions. The doors were open. I didn't break anything. Didn't see anyone breaking anything. No broken windows. Didn't see any of that. Just as everyone else, earlier in the day, there were street preachers there. There were people fellowshipping. There were, women and children. There were veterans in wheelchairs. I mean, it was just not something that you would think as something that, man, I should get out of here. This is not a good situation to be in. It never crossed my mind. But anyways, as the doors open, I walked through, open set of doors. There was a police officer on each side. You could not stop walking just because people were filing through. And this is all on video. It's pinned actually to the top of my Twitter feed right now. So if there's anybody, maybe doesn't want to believe me, they can go watch this video for themselves. I saw a third police officer on my right-hand side. I walked straight over to this police officer. I thanked him for his service. Told him, I had nothing but respect for him. He gave me a fist bump. And at that moment, I walked on inside. So I walked inside. I remember, and I'm heard on the video, reminding people not to be violent, not to be destructive, which nobody had done those things throughout the day, but we'd been reminding each other throughout the entire day because we knew that the media was looking for any opportunity to paint us in a bad picture. And just like a lot of other people, I live streamed this entire event for everyone to see it. I didn't really think that, I was doing anything that was going to be leading me down the road to going to prison. And so I walked in. I was in the public rotunda area for roughly 10 minutes. I got a big alert on my phone. It was like, if you ever get an Amber Alert on your phone, it was one of those types of alerts. An emergency alert system came up and started flashing and making noises. And I looked down and it said DC was going into into lockdown. Curfew was at 6 p.m. And what's crazy is at that time I thought, man, I need to get out of here and find my group, get back on the bus and get out of here so I don't get caught out after curfew and get in trouble. That was, little did I know that would be the least of my worries if that would have been the case, but that's what I was thinking. So after that, I didn't have cell phone service anymore. I don't know if they just turned it off or jammed. I don't know what happened, but I didn't have cell phone service anymore at that point. So I walked back over to that same police officer. I asked if there was another way to get out. And he said, no, your best bet is to go back out the same door you came in. I said, thank you, sir. And I walked out the same door that I came in. Remember, I don't have cell phone service. So, and once again, I didn't see everything that was happening on the other side of the building. But I'll never forget, getting back on the bus, start getting out, getting into cell phone service. And my phone is just blowing up at this point. You got to remember, my cell phone number and all this stuff was public information, where I'd ran for office and it was all publicly listed. My phone, I've never had so many text messages, and it was all media people. And at first I was like, what? I was shocked. I didn't know if, I was kind of like, this is kind of impressive. All these big media people want to talk to me right now. At first I thought it was just because I was there. Honestly, that's really what I thought. But as we start getting into cell phone service more, and there's other people on the bus that I rode are starting to speak about the videos they're watching, then I was like, oh man, like this could be bad. I don't like, they must think I was part of that crowd. That's why they want to talk to me. And you got to remember, guys, all of us was on the east side of the building. I mapped it out one day during my legal defense. It was over a 1 mile walk to get from where we were at around the building over there to the west side of the building. I mean, this is a huge building for someone who's never been into DC. It's not like just a regular little county courthouse or something. I mean, it was over a 1 mile walk to get around the building and get over to there. We had no clue these things were happening. And so I was as shocked as everyone else. And at this point, I was kind of shocked about, I guess I was thinking, man, I'm gonna have to deal with the media. Being an elected official, they're gonna think that I was involved in this. I'm just gonna have to make sure and let everybody know that I didn't partake in any violence or anything, And then, I got on social media. I've already been doxxed at this point from all these Antifa, BLM groups and all this. And they're all saying, oh, you're going to get hung for treason and all this. And the first few times you hear that, you kind of laugh. But, after you read about 1,000 comments of that, you start to question, well, did I do something, that like, was it that bad, and so I started getting a little concerned, a little scared. And so I got home and reached out to a lawyer friend of mine, and he said, yeah, I think that it would just be safe. I don't think you have anything to worry about, but, let's just go ahead and send a letter or contact them, and I'll let them know, the FBI, that I'm representing you if they want you to let me know, and you'll turn yourself in. I said, absolutely. I don't want them to kick my door down in the middle of the night with my family here, with my wife and my 4 young kids, my newborn. And so that was my concern, and sure enough, though, that's what they did. But I'll stop right there, since we're going to get into that portion of everything. But nonviolent, non-destructive, walk through open doors. Oh, charges. I was originally charged with the 2 misdemeanors that most people were charged with. They arrested me on January 8th. I was in the very first wave of arrests. Unfortunately, quickly became one of the faces of this just from being an elected official, which was used against me during my legal defense throughout all of this. I was originally charged with the 2 misdemeanors, and then a few months later, they charged me with 2 more misdemeanors. And then less than a month after that one, I'm at this point, I'm facing 4 misdemeanors. Less than a month later, they came back and was like, choose your misdemeanor and we'll drop the other charges. And I said, great, send me the paperwork. I'm ready to sign. This is a verbal plea deal. And which we thought it was weird that they just offered, like, what was the point of charging me with 2 more misdemeanors just to come back 2 weeks later to drop them? We didn't know. It was confusing. And but anyway, so the week that I was supposed to enter that plea deal in court, the prosecuting attorney reached out through my attorney and informed us that not only were they withdrawing the verbal plea offer, that this was coming from the highest levels of the DOJ. She didn't know where it was coming from. To settle in was going to be a really long process from this point forward, because everything had to go up the chain of command and down the chain of command, everything that we discussed and negotiated from that point forward. And then she said, "Oh, and by the way, we're indicting you on the 1512 felony obstruction of official proceeding charge." And so now all of a sudden I go from, thinking this is over with to now I'm facing 24 years in prison for walking through an open set of doors. And I cannot begin to tell you how devastating this moment was for not only myself, but my wife and my family. You know, you got to think, never been in trouble with the law before. I didn't know anything about the legal system. I didn't know there was federal sentencing guidelines or anything like that. And when I hear 24 years, I went to the bathroom and cried. I went in the bathroom away from my family, and I just cried because, to be honest with you, I was just thinking about my two little girls at the time. They were ages like 4 and 3. And I remember just literally just devastated, crying, thinking, I'm not even going to be out in time to walk my little girls down the aisle and give them away. I'm going to miss their entire life. And that's all I could think about. It was absolutely devastating, to say the least. And then from there, they came back later and was like offering me plea deals of 3 years or whatever, which still sucks, but at least I was like, okay, it's better than 24, But it was still terrible, obviously, and I just kept saying no because at that point I understood federal sentencing guidelines. If I went to trial, it's about what I was going to face anyways, and so I just kept saying no. And then in January of this year, they came, and you got to think at this point, I'm financially drained like most everyone else from legal fees, and they know that if you've never been arrested before, the feds they take your bank information, all of that. They sit there and watch your bank accounts just dwindle down in legal fees, and so they came back in January of this year and said this is a final plea deal, take it or leave it, felony civil disorder. And instead of 3 years or whatever, is going to be putting me at 0 to 6 months in prison. For whatever reason, I was still thinking, well, there's a chance I get 0, But the big thing was instead of $500,000 in restitution and fines, it was going to be about $4,000 in restitution and fines, which is what it ended up being. So I took the plea deal, and then honestly, that was really hard. I want everybody to know, if you've never been in a situation, I used to watch Netflix documentaries. I used to sit there and be like, I would never plead guilty to something that I didn't feel that I should or that I did or whatever. You know what I mean? Whatever those reasons are. But when you're in that situation, maybe if I was younger, it might have been different too. I don't know. But when you're set in that situation and you're talking about spending years away from your family. I've got a wife and kids, and I got 4 kids. I'm an active father. I'm in my opinion, a great dad. I love my kids, and I thought it was more important for me to be home for them than it was to, I thought it was important for me to swallow my pride at that point and move on with my life. My wife was begging me to sign this plea deal. She was ready for this to be over with, and hope that we got 3 months or less, and that's what I ended up getting sentenced to, is 3 months in federal prison. And we can get into that in a minute in terms of the prison sentences if you want, Brandon. But really quick, I want to tell Geri just how brave you are for speaking out and sharing Matt's story, and my heart absolutely breaks for you guys. And me and Brandon were speaking on the phone. I don't know, it was a couple of days ago maybe, and we were just discussing how it's been hard dealing with the media throughout all of this, even from our perspective. I was involved in politics. Brandon's been all over the media. It was hard for us, and we've dealt with the media before. I can't imagine how hard and difficult this was for somebody who had never felt the wrath of the media before, to just be thrown to the wolves on the national stage like that and just ripped apart to shreds on a daily basis. I just can't imagine. I mean, it was hard for me, so I can't imagine how hard it was for people who had never went through that before. But I just want you to know, Geri, we love you. We're praying for you, and we're always here for you guys.
Well, thank you, Derrick. But you know what? I want to say that you talk about the media and everything. Matt actually reached the point where I went in his house one day and I noticed his television wasn't there. And I said, "What happened to your television?" And he said, "I gave it away. I couldn't look at it anymore because he didn't want to see his face on the news anymore." He gave his television away. I mean, and this is a guy who did podcasts on holistic remedies and CBD oil and alkaline water. And, he was all into, he was against the pharmaceutical industry completely. He just did not believe in it after he watched his mother die. And he wasn't into politics. He wasn't, his podcasts were mostly about health and taking care of your health and eating right and running and the things that he was passionate about. And they took every last thing he was passionate about away. Everything. And when he gave his television away because he was afraid to see himself on TV. If that gives you any idea, the fear that was instilled in him by this Department of Justice, I don't even know. It's hard for me to even fathom. And I watched him go through it. But they are evil and they have no souls. They are destroying people left and right, and they do not care. And no apologies ever came, no sympathy cards ever came to our family on behalf of the judge or the Department of Justice or anyone, because they don't care.
So I'm going to hop in and say, Geri, Geri's exactly right. You know, the judge in my case, in John's case, literally said false information. He said that 5 people died in the Capitol that day. And in addition to being just grossly offended that a judge doesn't know very, very, very basic facts about that day, is the people that died that, you know, like Ashley Babbitt and then, you know, Geri's nephew, for example. The judges have no idea about any of that, and it's frustrating. And I want to also speak to the point that Derrick made about the plea deal. I was one of those people that never thought I would take a plea deal. I built America's Frontline Doctors as essentially an anti-corruption platform. I have a very hard time saying something, you know, or going along with anything that's not scrupulously true. And I'll be careful, you know, because I did sign a plea deal, so I'm not going to maybe necessarily talk about my particular case. But the overwhelming force that is applied, you know, I didn't know when I first got arrested that it was a 20-year felony, because I was just putting this off. You know, we were being put off so often by the government side. They weren't ready. So I never really looked it up. But when I discovered that this was a 20-year felony, I have a medical license, I have a law license, and you're facing a 20-year felony. I mean, there is no. I absolutely would have gone to trial if I was facing the one charge, which I think at least you could argue about, which is a trespass charge. I don't think I was guilty. I'm going to have to be cautious what I say because I've signed a plea deal. But all crimes require a mens rea, an intent to do something. And as I said, we were swept up with the crowd. You can see it on the video. You can see that we're physically being propelled in with a crowd. But at least you could say the trespass charge is something you can talk about. But when they start throwing 20-year felonies at you, you know, what exactly you're supposed to do. And that's why I find John, my co-defendant's story, so utterly compelling, because he's the only person I think any of us will ever know that looked that pure evil and that overwhelming force. John's situation reminds me of that famous picture of the one person who stood up against the tank in Tiananmen Square, right? There was one person and then there was a tank, right? And so John is looking at that 20-year felony and he says, and, you know, he'll tell his own story. But I just want to back Derrick up. You know, I also did not think I would take a plea, but I felt that they had overwhelming force, you know?
I wanted to kind of just quickly speak to that as well, because if it brings context to anybody listening, when I talk about the fact that I took a plea deal, the best way I can sum it up for people is that when you're put in a situation like this and you're hideously overcharged, and to be clear, I never went in the building on January 6th. I didn't get within 35 feet of going inside, and I filmed a video for 8 minutes. And to the best of my knowledge, I believe I am the only defendant that was charged with a felony of being on restricted grounds. Most people who even went inside the building got misdemeanors for parading and picketing or for occupying a restricted building. So I was charged with 2 felonies and a misdemeanor. I too was facing decades in prison, and I didn't even go inside the building. And so when I tell people about my choice to take a plea deal, what I say was, the question for me was never, how do I win and how do I lose? The question was, how do I lose the least? This was a lose, lose, lose. There is no winning in these situations. You're not going to win before a DC judge and a DC jury. You don't stand a chance. They won't release jurisdiction. And honestly, part of what compelled me to take a plea deal as well was that so much damage was already done. By the time the FBI raided me and took me to jail and I got out 2.5 days later, my name was ruined in the media. And the media wasn't reporting on this as if these were alleged crimes or alleged activities. They said, Strzok did this, Strzok did this, Strzok said this, this was Strzok's intention. And I thought to myself, I'm just going to take the stupid plea deal because I've already been found guilty in the court of public opinion while I was in jail for several days without the ability to even speak. And yeah.
I want to, yeah. So let me just share a very specific example of overcharging. Okay. So the defendants that they're really hitting up hard, like John, like myself, and others who are languishing, is they throw this charge 18 U.S. Code 1752 called restricted building or grounds. And this is a potential 20-year prison term. We discovered in doing our research that there's this statute really had nothing to do with our situation. Not only the statute has to do with, 1512. Thank you, John. Has to do with witness tampering. That's when you read the statute. It's all about somebody threatening a witness, intimidating, etc. That's actually what the statute is. There is a statute that if you wanted to say about interfering with, an election or something like that, proceeding would have been 1505. In other words, there's a very similar one that has a much lower penalty. I think it's 1 year, maybe it was 5 years. But this 20-year felony that they're throwing at people isn't even applicable to this magical fantasy that they're saying happened that didn't actually happen. And it's very, very offensive and very, very dangerous when the government, which has all the power, is charging for crimes that didn't even happen, and they're bringing them in front of juries that they know will convict no matter what you give them. In John's case, and in my case, the misdemeanors had the word disorderly or violent in them. And yet you're watching the entire video where we're walking peacefully between the ropes. How could anybody have charged you with something with the word violent or disorderly when you can see the entire time that there's no violence and there's no disorderly? You can only do that if the prosecution's corrupt, the judge doesn't object, and the jury's going to convict no matter what the prosecution gives them. That's what Brandon meant when he said it's lose-lose situation. That the government had opportunity to bring a more appropriate statute, and they specifically did not. They specifically brought the wrong statutes.
One of the things I want to just say here is about a month after Matt killed himself, I was going through all of his case files that we had gotten from his attorney. And I came across one of the papers, one of the emails from the prosecutor that was on Matt's case. And his name and phone number was on the email. And I picked up the phone and I called him. And I got his voicemail, and I left a voicemail saying who I was and that I just had a couple of questions for him. And he called me back the following day, and I was connected to him through somebody else. And I was informed I was having the conversation recorded, which kind of made me laugh. Like, I wondered, well, what did they think I was going to do over the phone to this prosecutor? What kind of threats was I going to make, And basically he got on the phone, and I told him about who I was and about Matt. And he says, well, I want you to know that many of the people in our department, the Justice Department, and I can't even use that word justice anymore because there is no justice, but many of the people in our department felt very bad when they heard about Matt taking his life. And I said, well, let me tell you something. Many of the people in your department, including yourself, are the reason Matt took his life. And he said to me, well, if Matt could have just waited another month, I don't think that the terrorism enhancement would have stuck. And I said, do you not understand? It was the threat of the terrorism enhancement with the 4 to 6 years in prison that would come along with it that caused Matt to kill himself. And you stand here and ask me why he couldn't wait another month. It was the waiting that wore him down mentally. And I left this man with this. I said, every night when you go to bed, I hope the name Matthew Perna is the last thing you think of and the role you played in his death. And I hung up. They don't care.
Derrick, go ahead.
I just wanted to chime in on that as well. You know, as someone who loves this country, as Matt obviously did, as all of us do, it is really hurtful for your government to quote unquote call you a terrorist against your country when you love your country. So that has to play a part in all of this as well from that standpoint, because you know it there's very few things that bothers me, but it does bother me when someone thinks that I'm an insurrectionist or a terrorist who hates this country when I love this country. And if you listen to our current political prisoners who are still being held captive right now, they sing the national anthem every evening at 9 o'clock because they love this country. And I just wanted to add that context there, you know, to what Geri was saying about all that. It is downright hurtful. It doesn't matter if they were, we're gonna take it away later. And the audacity of that man and this government to make that comment to you just angers me to my core, and I'm so sorry for everything that you guys have went through and are still going through from this. But I just wanted to add
And
that.
Derrick, to that point, I cried for the first time in my case when I had my hearing on the second day that I was in jail. The first time I cried was when I was sitting in my orange jumpsuit before a federal judge who said, "This is the case of the United States of America versus Brandon Straka." And I just broke down. I mean, it was so, I felt it's like my brain couldn't even comprehend that was really happening. That was the first time I cried after I got arrested. But could we get to the point where I want people to know about the FBI raids. I want them to know about being taken to jail. And I want them to know about those first weeks because I have plenty of stories to tell about. I mean, I literally to this day have PTSD about not just the FBI raid, but I literally have a phobia about opening my mailbox 2 years later. I have a phobia about opening my door if I'm not expecting somebody and there's a knock on the door, about when my phone rings and it's a number I don't recognize. And so I want people to understand, because in those early weeks after I got arrested, it was like every day I was getting stuff in the mail saying that you're on this list, or you're restricted from doing this. You've been placed on this. You're no longer allowed to do this. I mean, it was just like being punched in the gut over and over and over again with horrible news. And so, Dr. Gold, do you want to start and let us know what was it like when the FBI came to your house and what happened in those weeks after?
Yes, for sure. This is a really hugely important part of the story. I just want to share right before I do that, because my son just alerted me to this. Some of us know Elijah Schaffer, and he was a journalist. He's a conservative journalist, and he happened to be there that day. And I think he just tweeted us out today just to remind us. You're talking about the FBI stuff, and he does remind us that he said this is from Elijah. The FBI spied on me for being a credentialed journalist on J6. They ordered Apple not to alert me my phone was tapped. Apple didn't even hand over this info to federals for the San Bernardino terrorists, but they handed it over for me. I just wanted to start with that because the power of our government to do what it wants against any individual is essentially infinite. And the wisdom of our founding fathers was to give us was to kind of stay the government away from the individual. That's why I have Bill of Rights. So I just want to say that. But when we don't constrain the government, it's just a matter of time until we're all victims. The extrajudicial punishment that's being put upon us is incredible. The judicial punishment is you go and you stand before a corrupt judge in a corrupt city, and then they hand down your sentence. And that's the judicial punishment. But at the very least, that's all it's supposed to be. You're only supposed to be punished by the judicial system. No other aspect of the system is supposed to punish you, not the executive branch and not the legislative branch. In my case, as virtually, I think everybody's case, we took so much extrajudicial punishment. In my particular case, they made it so I essentially could not fly. I'll leave it to others to explain that, but I was essentially put on a no-fly list. I had just launched a nonprofit, America's Frontline Doctors, a few months earlier. And I attempted to open up some different bank accounts. It happens that I have an excellent credit score. Well, I was turned down by 3 banks. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I was highly concerned because Bank of America had revealed the location of its customers just voluntarily gave up that information to federal investigators. And I didn't want to have any money in Bank of America anymore, where my foundation had some money. But I couldn't believe I was literally being turned down by banks. It was very, very scary from that perspective. The FBI took my phone, they took my computer, it virtually incapacitated the organization. We were very tiny, we had just gotten started. Remember January 2021, how scared people were about COVID? America's Frontline Doctors was like the only people really in the nation, it seemed, that was helping people, trying to help them get early treatment medication. And all of a sudden, we were given an almost lethal blow. I couldn't travel. I then had my medical license threatened and I had my law license threatened. I'm still facing all that to this day. One of the special little pleasures that has happened to me is that I was from California and I had a California medical license. And through all this, I applied for the Florida state medical license because I decided to move to the free state of Florida. In that process of obtaining my Florida medical license, California branch, the Los Angeles branch of the FBI, writes to Florida that I had been charged with treason. Now, let's break that down for a moment. They put in the correct statute that I was convicted of, the misdemeanor trespass that I took the plea. They write that statute, but right next to that, they write the word treason, which meant that a human being from the FBI had to go in and write that. It couldn't have possibly happened by accident. It was then upon me to work with the Florida state to explain that the FBI was lying. You can imagine, I'm on the defensive already. I also had to defend my law license. Now, my attorneys even were saying, this is kind of ridiculous. This was a misdemeanor trespass. This is not really a thing. Medical Board of California is still giving me a very difficult time, and the New York Bar is still giving me a very difficult time. The punishment went on and on. In addition to my being put on a no-fly list, they decided to try to do this to people they suspected of working with me. This was like what they used to say, was in the 60s or 60s about McCarthyism. Oh my goodness. So my minor son for a long time couldn't fly normally. People who worked with me couldn't fly normally. People who knew people who had worked with me couldn't fly normally. It was incredible, the power. There was no due process. I couldn't even figure out who was behind the people attacking my ability and other people's ability to fly. Was it the TSA? Was it the Department of Homeland Security? Was it the FBI? Was it the DOJ? We didn't even know who you could even file a complaint against. I mean, I had the best lawyers and nobody could even know which way to turn. So I essentially just gave up flying. And then one of the worst things that ever happened to me, and I forgot, Brandon, to even talk about the arrest itself. The arrest, let me say two things real quick. One is the arrest itself was unbelievably traumatic. I'm a pretty low fear kind of person. I'm an ER doctor. I can take a lot of things. But we hear the most blood-curdling scream, FBI, 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 at your door, and you immediately think it can't possibly be real because these sound like murdering drug cartel members. Like, there's no way this could be real. This, your government couldn't possibly do this. The people who were speaking to how sad it is for patriots to hear that the government's against you is a little bit like that. The government of my nation couldn't be at the door with blood-curdling screams. It just couldn't possibly be real. But it was, and we didn't move quickly enough, so they broke the door down, and there was a dozen people with a dozen officers there's about 20 officers, about 12 of them with huge rifles pointed right at us. As Brandon said, it was very traumatic. It was like PTSD for a long time afterwards. It was terrible. But just about the worst thing that ever happened as a result of this, when they made it impossible for me to fly, I had a lot of speaking engagements. And a Patriot at one point loaned us a plane. It was kind of a small, modest plane, maybe 6-seater. And we had stopped at a very small rural airport to refuel. And while we were stopped there, I was still on the plane working. And we were surrounded by 6 men in plainclothes men who stated that they were from, I forget, maybe Department of Homeland Security. And it was all very, DHS. And it was all very peculiar because we were just at this like little tiny small rural airport getting fuel and we were about to take off again. And who were these people? And they were suddenly around the plane, and they send up a canine dog, which was totally shocking. And I knew as a lawyer, you can't just board someone's property. And I'm like, what are you doing? And the guy says they have a positive narcotic hit. And my blood ran cold because I thought, how are you going to take out, Dr. Gold, for example, running America's Frontline Doctors? I wasn't really worried for my life, but I absolutely thought they would try to frame me with drugs. And I knew that that's what was happening. I had no doubt that that's what was happening. And so we got the dog off the plane, and then they have a standoff. They need us to come down. And I said, absolutely not. We're absolutely not exiting the plane. It was a very narrow doorway. So they would have had to really been physical with us if they wanted to get us off the plane. And I knew that would buy us some time because nobody wanted that kind of interaction. And we had our phones out, and we were filming the whole thing. And my very brilliant son, who was still very young at the time, came up with a solution, and eternally grateful to him for being so sharp. I didn't know what to do. I had 3 lawyers on the phone. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Because I knew for sure if I let them on the plane, they were going to plant drugs. That much was very obvious to me. So my son said, why don't you call a local police officer, which I thought was quite brilliant because I didn't think that the collusion could go all the way down. And that's exactly what we did. We called 911. A local police officer came, and he watched them search the plane. Of course, there was nothing, and they left. But I learned in that moment that the power of the government is so incredibly awesome. It's just so much more than the sentence that the judge hands down, which is corrupt in and of itself. It's that we've got a bureaucratic state, and that somebody anonymous, who will never know who, is pushing a button and putting a finger on the lever, and your life is destroyed. And this is what China does with the social credit score. You disobey somebody in China, the next thing you know, you can't get a bank loan, you can't get your daughter married, you can't get into college, you can't get a car loan, you can't get on a train, and you can't get on a plane. This was the Americanized version of that. And it's all without any due process, and it's all without any notice, and there's no recourse.
Do you guys mind if I jump in real quick? Because I can kind of explain the terrorism watch list at the airport, and it ties into those initial weeks after my arrest, which I want people to know about too, because these are some of these things as much as I've told my story, I've never talked about this stuff. So the FBI raided my house on the morning of January 25th, Monday, January 25th. They came at dawn, got me out of bed, put me in handcuffs, and a team of agents in tactical gear came into my apartment and began stripping my apartment of computers, iPads, phones, thumb drives, hard drives, my camera equipment, my clothing. It was crazy. And meanwhile, a couple of other agents cuffed my hands. My hands were cuffed behind my back within 30 seconds. And they took me off to jail. And I ended up sitting in jail for 2.5 days before I got out. When I got out of jail, part of it for me was I was pretty traumatized because they had told me that I was going to be in 23-1 lockdown, meaning you're in your cell for 23 hours a day. And supposedly you're supposed to be out for 1 hour a day, which never happened during the days that I was there. I was just in my cell. But the judge ordered my release. And I was actually just telling this earlier in a space that Derrick was in with me. The FBI raid and the FBI arrest was so intense and so over the top and so crazy. And then to be like 2 days later, standing before a judge and a federal prosecutor, on behalf of the government, is standing there saying, we know that Mr. Straka didn't engage in any violence or vandalism or theft or destruction. And we know that Mr. Straka didn't go inside the Capitol. So we're comfortable not seeking detainment of Mr. Straka pending his trial. And I just remember standing there and thinking, if you know all of this, why the hell did a team of FBI agents just crash into my apartment at like a scene out of a movie where I'm like a mass murderer? And then like 2 days later, this prosecutor is almost like jovially being like, we know that he didn't do this and this. And so we're good with letting him go. And so I was released. I was released from jail at about 2 or 3 in the morning. And they had picked me up in a blizzard. So it's when you get released from jail, it's literally the craziest thing. I mean, they literally like open a side door and just kick you out in the street. And you're just like, what the hell just happened to my life? And so it was 2 or 3 in the...
Exactly.
Yeah, it was...
I'm sorry, Brandon, but exactly like that. They dumped me out. Can I just say one thing? They dumped me out, and I'm like, I had no phone, no money, no clothes, no cell phone, no nothing. And they're like, go get home. And I'm like on the streets of downtown LA. I'm like, oh my
100%.
God.
You're like, do I just turn a trick to like earn some money to get a cab? Or like, what do I do? So literally, it was like 3 in the morning. They opened a side door. They pushed me out, and I'm on the side of the jail, and there's just these huge snow drifts everywhere. I don't have a phone. I don't have money. And so, but I knew that a friend of mine because my lawyer told me when we had the hearing, my lawyer told me that my friend Libby, who was also a coworker of mine with Walkaway, had flown to Omaha, which is where I was, to be with me when I got out of jail. So I knew where she would be staying because she always stays at the same place when she comes. So I went to her hotel, found her. They told me her room. You know, we hugged for a while. We cried. She started explaining to me what I was accused of. She started explaining to me what I was charged with. She started explaining to me what the media was saying about it. And then she started, I mean, you have to bear in mind, this was only a couple of days, just a few days after my arrest. And she starts just rattling off to me, our lawyer quit. This person quit. We've been banned from this. We've been banned from this. And she starts, and I mean, it was devastating and it was shocking. I mean, she was talking about being banned from our email services, being banned from our donor portals, being banned from payment processors. It was insane. And she looked at me and she just said, if your life and your freedom are more important to me than any of this. And she said, if we have to shut down Walkaway and we just have to be done, she was like, we have nothing but pride to feel in what we've done the last couple of years, and maybe we'll just do something else. And at that moment, I just kind of took a deep breath and I said, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to keep going forward. We're going to come back from this. This is crazy. But I was I was severely traumatized from the raid and the arrest and being put in jail. And by the way, sitting in jail, you don't sit in jail thinking you're going to get out in a couple of days. You sit in jail. All I could think of when I was in jail was that for 2.5 weeks before that, all we had heard on the news was insurrection, 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 and that the FBI was raiding people. And I truly thought I was charged with insurrection. I thought I was charged with treason, and I believed that I was going to be extradited to DC, and that I would literally just never see the outside of a prison cell for the rest of my life. Joe Biden had just become the president, and that's what I believed was going to happen. And so that's why it was so traumatizing being in the cell, thinking you're never getting out, and not even really understanding what you're charged with or what's going on. And so it took about 2 or 3 days after I got out of jail before I felt safe to go back to my apartment. I had been staying with my friend Libby in her hotel room. And so like 3 days later, we go back to my apartment for the first time. My heart was pounding. The last time I'd been there, FBI agents were raiding it and taking my things. And when we got to my apartment, there was a note taped to the door. And my heart is pounding. We open the envelope that stuck to my door, and there's a letter from my building manager saying I have 30 days to vacate the apartment, that I have to get out. And I had been a model tenant. I mean, they loved me. But they saw the news, they saw everything that was happening, and they were like, no. And so that was the first thing where I started to feel the collateral effects of what had happened. And then I would say it was probably within a week after that, I got a letter in the mail from the government saying that my TSA pre-check status had been revoked because I was no longer considered a low-risk traveler. And then we started getting permanently banned by PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, Patreon, Constant Contact, MailChimp, donor portals, emails. I mean, just everything that you can imagine. It just doesn't stop, one after another. And like every day, it just won't stop. And you lose your humanity because they won't even they stop treating you like a person. Like, even if you write them back and say, look, I haven't even pled guilty or not guilty. I haven't even had an opportunity to plea. Like, can you please at least wait until I've been convicted before? And they're like, no, it's January 6th. Like, you're not a person anymore. You're done. And then I tried to take my first business trip about 6 weeks, I think, after I'd gotten out of jail. And just another side note is that I'd gotten to the point for those first several months. I used to wake up every night in the middle of the night, sometimes after I'd only been asleep for an hour or two. And I would wake up just like in a panic because I was constantly afraid they were going to come back. I kept thinking they were going to come back, that they weren't finished with me. So I'd sleep for like an hour or two, and then I would shoot up, and I would spend the rest of the night just walking in circles around my apartment until the sun came up. And it was probably about 6 weeks after I got arrested, I tried to take my first business trip, and I went to the airport. And when I got there, it was a Delta flight, and the agent was behaving very strangely when they were entering in my information. And I was already conditioned at this point to panic because nothing in my life was normal anymore. And so I was like, what's going on? And he was like, I just need to make a phone call. And so he gets on the phone, and I'm just standing there, and it literally took 30 minutes. I was just standing there for 30 minutes. And he's asking me these weird questions like, are you traveling with firearms? Are you, what is the purpose of your travel? And so finally, after 30 minutes, he gets off the phone, gives me my boarding pass, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And he was like, well, I just had a note in your account that I had to call the airline, and we had to call TSA, and we had to have a conversation with TSA about your account. And he's like, but it's okay. He was like, you're good to go now. And he handed me my boarding pass. And I noticed that my boarding pass had stamped on it 4 large red letters, SSSS, or Quad S. So I didn't know at the time, but what that means is that we had been placed on a Quad S list, which is the highest level terrorism list that you can be on and still be allowed to fly. Anything beyond that, you literally can't fly at all. And so you go up to TSA, or you go up to the security checkpoint, and when they scan your boarding pass, a red light lights up and it goes, "Arr," and it alerts them that they have to have the manager of TSA come over. So the manager of TSA comes over, and then they have to shut off a security lane just for you. And this is every J6 defendant, by the way. Every J6 defendant has been placed on this list. They section off a security lane just for you, and they have about 9 TSA agents come over. And so one of them takes all of your items and starts taking each item out of your bag one by one, and they swab it and they scan it and they test every item in your bag for explosive materials. Another agent takes you aside and gives you a full body pat down, front and back, puts their hands down your pants, down the front, down the back, up the sides. It's the most invasive pat down you can possibly imagine. You have to walk through the metal detector twice. You have to walk through the body scanner twice. They take pictures of your boarding pass. They take pictures of your IDs. The entire process can take hours, literally hours. And then the craziest part is that after you're cleared, they have a team of agents follow you around the airport everywhere you go. And when you go to your gate and you're sitting there and you're waiting for your flight, they have agents stationed all around you. And sometimes they bring dogs. And when it comes time to board the flight, they bring a special machine to the gate, and they do it all again every single time. They take your bag, they take every item out of your bag, scan it, swab it for explosive materials, but this time they do it in front of all of the other passengers as you're boarding the plane, and then they give you a pat down again in front of the other passengers. So by the time you're cleared and you can actually board the flight, all the passengers on the plane are terrified to be on board. There's like, who are you? Like, what the hell is going on? And the craziest part is that if you have a connecting flight and you go to your connecting gate, they do it all again at the connecting flight, at the connecting gate. So every J6er, any person who got a misdemeanor charge for disorderly conduct or for trespassing is on this level of terrorism. Like somehow we went from like some of us having TSA pre-check to they're afraid we're going to hijack a plane and kill people and like fly it into a building because we got misdemeanor trespassing charges.
Were they swabbing us for explosives, Brandon? Because I thought they were swabbing me for my Givenchy perfume.
It's for explosives.
So, and by the way, so you really explained that really, really well. I just want to remind everybody, they not only did they do this to J6ers, they're doing it. I don't know if you had this experience, Brandon. They're doing it to people that you know. So they did it to my minor son, who had nothing to do with this. They did it to people I worked with, and then they did it to a person I worked with. They did it to his colleague. It's incredible because they assumed his colleague knew me because they did it to him, and then they did it to the guy he was flying with, which is unbelievable. I am currently still in litigation with TSA, which is actually unbelievable. So it's very
well,
severe.
and
I'd like to also add that they did that to Matt's dad the first time he flew. Matt's girlfriend, who I don't even know how they knew it was his girlfriend because they had taken his social media accounts away from him, which led me to believe they were, tapping his phone, but they did it to her as well. And they also did it to Matt's aunt. So I don't think it's a coincidence at all.
No, and again, I want to reiterate to you guys who are listening, we're talking about people who haven't been convicted. We're not even talking about people who pled guilty and got convicted. Literally, the moment you're charged, you go on this list, even before you've had an opportunity to plead guilty or not guilty.
For misdemeanor charges, Brandon, it's not like you're even charged with something crazy. It's misdemeanors. That's what's crazy.
Well, no, but I want to it is crazy, but I want to emphasize again from a legal perspective, in our country, there's a separation of powers, executive, judicial, and the legislative branch. The determination of the punishment is through the judicial branch. The enactment of the punishment is executive branch, as like the Bureau of Prison. What we had here is we had branches of the executive determining that you should be punished, right? Even though there's been no conviction by the court. This is entirely illegal from top to bottom. TSA, DOJ, whoever it is, does not have the power to punish you. The only one who has the power to punish you is if you've actually been convicted and the judge unpunishes you. This is very, very, very scary stuff. I mean, I just want to, again, point that out to people, that we're having a system of law in our nation now where we've now witnessed 1,000 or 2,000 people being punished outside of the court system just because the king and his emperor and court has said so.
Exactly. It's people being punished by big tech. Sorry, John, this is very quick, but we're being punished by big tech. We're being punished by, software services that we use to do our businesses, by all of these different things. But also keep in mind, because this is absolutely a political crime and a political situation, and we know that in this country, like more than 90% of the media is extremely left-wing. I mean, we're being hunted by left-wing reporters. A lot of people don't know this. In fact, I don't know that I've ever said this publicly. I told this to Derrick earlier today. I ended up pleading guilty to a misdemeanor charge. I was charged with a couple of felonies and a misdemeanor. I took a misdemeanor plea deal. The night before my plea hearing, which I believe was in the month of September or October of 2021, and I can prove this for anybody who might doubt it. I've got it documented. I've actually got the emails. A reporter from CNN contacted the prosecutor in my case the night before my plea hearing. And he said, he's like, I have evidence that Mr. Straka is planning to plead guilty tomorrow to this misdemeanor, but he doesn't actually believe he's guilty. Do you want to rethink offering him this plea deal? CNN was literally trying to kill my plea deal the night before my plea hearing. I mean, when have you ever heard of so-called journalists or reporters involving themselves in the legal process of people's cases? CNN was literally trying to get my plea deal killed the night before my plea hearing. This is insanity. This is what we're dealing with. John, please go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I was just going to pick up on something that Dr. Gold mentioned, which was the law. And I think it's becoming obvious here, but it's important for us to note that we have no law. We have no rule of law. It's been totally bulldozed, and it's been really accosted and weaponized against us. And I'm just thinking about how you constantly hear these self-righteous, particularly leftist Democrats, but politicians generally love to, aggrandize about no one is above the law. and yet none of them are actually following the law whatsoever. They're just waving it around like a bat and bludgeoning people to death with it. Dr. Gold, tell me if I can make a little, if I can speak to something that's coming out soon that speaks to this concept.
Yeah, of course.
So Dr. Gold has a really exciting. She's going to be publishing a book, and we had been hoping to actually have it published on January 6th, which is today, of course, the anniversary of the event. And because of some other nightmares that we're dealing with, because we fight on the side of truth, and that brings a lot of bullets our way, we were delayed. But that project is in progress and coming soon. And I just wanted to kind of give a little announcement about that, because I think it's appropriate, kind of exciting, and this audience will understand and appreciate. But the concept of the book is centered around the destruction of the rule of law, and specifically that everyone's waving around the law and waving around all of these things that they say they believe in or stand on. But it's a farce. It's a lie, because they don't apply it equally. They don't apply it logically. They don't apply it consistently. So if anything is not held to a consistent set of standards, it's not a standard. It's just a speech that you make when it suits your purposes, and you follow that trail to the end, and that's where we find ourselves in a lot of pain and misery. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that's coming, and that's a concept that I think is really important that we hone in on. That the rule of law is under attack. I always remember an amazing moment when Congressman Bob McEwen told a story about the inner hallways of the Harvard School of Law, and there's an inscription in the back corner he spoke about that says, "Law are the wise restraints that keep men free." And so without those, obviously, we become not free, and we just freely destroy each other. And that's where we're at right now.
The name of the book is Selective Persecution.
Do you want to read it to us tonight? Just do like the audiobook right here in this space.
We got to finish writing it first.
Okay. Got it.
Coming soon.
Derrick, I would love it if you chimed in. This might be a good opportunity for us to talk about the formation of plea deals. And, a lot of you in this space might be aware that this last summer, back to the media, there was a media coalition. It was 16 entities, including NBC, I think Huffington Post, New York Times, etc., filed a motion in my case to my judge asking for all of my sealed documents to be unsealed. And then magically, within 24 hours, 80% of my sealed documents ended up in the hands of those very media entities before there was any opportunity for the judge to rule on this. Now, these documents were sealed documents regarding my plea deal and a list of names of people that I had conversations with the DOJ about, people that I was asked questions about, and very innocuous questions. And for anybody who's interested, I was also subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, and I had a 3.5-hour deposition with the J6 committee, which was nearly identical to the conversations I had with the DOJ. And the transcript of that conversation that I had with the January 6th committee is now publicly available. So if anyone wants to know what I talked to the DOJ about, they can literally read my January 6th deposition, which is now publicly available. It's basically identical to the conversation I had with the DOJ. Nonetheless, a list of names was leaked, and I was blamed for. There was only one person on the list of names who went to prison, and that was Dr. Simone Gold. And the left-wing media immediately turned this into that I was responsible for Dr. Gold going to prison, that I had turned her into the FBI, even though she actually got arrested before I got arrested. But and I'll let her speak to that too. But Derrick, you and I have talked a lot about the plea deal process and what people go through. And can you speak to that and also about your own plea deal?
Yeah, absolutely. Be more than happy to do that. Really quick, I just wanted to say really quick, in terms of me being raided by the FBI, the thing that bothered me the most was that they made sure the media was here. So, the media had been swarming my house the day before. They weren't there at all on the 8th. They showed up, and then 15, had their tripod set up, and then 10 to 15 minutes later, the feds rolled in and arrested me in front of my wife and kids. And I just was like, you got to be kidding me, in terms of that. And I just want to use that opportunity too to for people who hate us, that's fine. But you got to remember that my kids are innocent in all this, and it was devastating for them to see me walked out that way. And once again, I would have all they had to do was call me. I would have turned myself in. I think 99% of us who have had our houses, our homes raided would have turned ourselves in. And for a long time, my kids were afraid of police officers, and that sucks because I support police officers. My uncle's a cop, the whole 9 yards. But anyways, in terms of the plea deals, I first want to make it known that everybody, to my knowledge, anyways, spoke to the FBI and the DOJ and prosecuting attorneys, or whatever, did interviews. I mean, that's just part of the process. In my particular situation, the two main questions that, in my opinion, they wanted me to agree with them on was they wanted me to say that the 2020 election was free and fair, and that it wasn't stolen, and that I made a mistake and I was wrong and I regret it. That's basically what they were getting at, in my opinion. And then the other one was they wanted, quite frankly, me to blame President Trump for my actions on that day. I kept basically just bringing it back to and trying to give me, basically trying to guide me, in my opinion, and coach me into saying it was Trump's fault that I did that day. And I'm like, I'm a grown up here, I'm responsible for my own actions. And in terms of the plea deal, everyone needs to remember that, and we all got to be careful in how we say all this, obviously, but they write your plea deal
I don't.
for you. They write your statement of facts for you. And then, yes, you sign that. You don't have a choice. You sign that, and you do agree to that technically when you sign that. And so, but I do want people to know that it's not that you don't go in a room and they don't send you a piece of paper and say, here's a plea agreement. You write down what it is that you did that day and go from there. No, they basically write it all up. They present it to you, and either you sign it or you don't.
Or you go to
And
trial.
that's right. Yeah, or you go to trial in D.C. where you have no option and no hope for a free trial. If people want to know just truly how corrupt and how the thumb is on the scale against January 6th defendants in not only the trials with the punishments, but in the trials themselves, in the upcoming Proud Boys case, I was reading Steve Baker's tweets about this. He does a fantastic job covering the January 6th trials. He's there every day and he's tweeting about it. And in this particular instance, one of the jurors had referred to the Proud Boys as a domestic terrorist group, as terrorists. And one of the attorneys for one of the Proud Boys had made a motion to strike that juror and not to allow them to be on the jury. And the judge overruled that and said, well, he said that the Proud Boys were, didn't say that your client was. And the attorney said, my client is the leader of the Proud Boys. He just called my client a terrorist, and they still allowed this juror to be on the jury. So that's just even, I mean, guys, they're literally playing on big screens in DC, in the park and stuff. I saw online where they were playing the January 6th sham committees on TV in the parks. I mean, no one can tell me that the jury pool is not tainted. I mean, that's just all there is to it. Name any other major case. Well, first of all, name any other situation that has had full-time media coverage for 2 years straight. But in any time that there is a lot of media coverage, they move the trial out of those areas, and it's just sad. So anyways, your options are to take a plea deal or basically go to prison. I mean, well, go to prison anyways, but your options are take a plea deal or go to prison for longer. That's really your options. And I really want to state really quick to clear this up in terms of where Brandon's coming from on this. I went to prison. All right, we can get into that here in a little bit, but this kind of ties into this specific area here. In prison, where, trust me, they take snitching extremely serious, and I can get into details about prison later if anybody wants to, but they take snitching extremely serious there. In prison, by prison rules, where it's taken the most serious, you're not considered a snitch on the yard unless you have what's called a 5K1 or 501K. I don't remember which order that is. It's either 5K1 or 501K form. And that would be when you actually testified in court against a co-defendant or someone else. Other than that, you're not, because to be honest with you, I was scared, when I was approached by the guys there. And, they basically was like, hey, what you here for? I told them. They thought it was cool, for the record. And but they started describing, first question they asked, no joke, was, did you snitch on President Trump? Because if you did, this is not going to work. And I said, no, I didn't, And then they were asking me if I'd cooperated. And trust me, they make you show paperwork for all this. So, I mean, I had to show all this paperwork. But, I've never been in trouble before, so I wasn't exactly sure what they were asking. I thought I did, but I didn't want to make a mistake here and misspeak. So, they're asking, well, did you cooperate? And I'm freaking out. I'm like, well, yeah, I cooperated. Because I gave interviews to the FBI. Yeah, I cooperated. You know what I mean? By that standard. So I set them down. I was like, listen, I just want to make this perfectly clear, everything that happened, because I'm not trying to get taken to the wall over there and getting beat up, because that was explained to me very early on. If you take stuff from us, you sit at our tables saying that you didn't do these things, and we found out you did, you see that wall. And I said, yeah. They said, we're going to take you to that wall and we're going to beat you up. And I was like, okay, which they used other words, but that was what they told me. So now I'm freaking out. And I'm like, I want to make sure, because you got to remember, when you get to prison, you don't have anything. So these guys are hooking me up with, clothes and shoes and, laundry bag, all these things. But the deal was, you better not be a snitch and you better not be a child molester when you receive these gifts from us, or we're going to make you pay for it. So I started explaining everything, because I just wanted to be perfectly clear and upfront and honest. And they started laughing at me because I was telling them that I spoke and gave interviews with the FBI. They literally started laughing. They're like, "Man, do you realize that everybody in here spoke to the FBI and the DOJ during our cases? If you're talking to them about your situation, it's perfectly fine." So I had to explain that whole entire story just to really, I guess, let you guys fully understand where I was coming from when I say that they don't consider that snitching by any means. So I hope that clears some of that up.
Well, I don't believe that anyone actually even believed it anyway. I mean, I think it was just something that was done to create further damage and also to create more division amongst a lot of us in the MAGA movement. But the list of names that came out were people that weren't even charged, weren't even accused. Like, people are calling me a snitch, and I'm like, this person isn't even accused of a crime. Like, they haven't even been and the thing with Dr. Gold is that, we knew each other before. And, there's this thing about a voice message, and I won't get into it too much, but, the cat's out of the bag. She was inside the building. She did an interview for the Washington Post and told them. And she called me when she was inside the building, and there was a voice message. And the FBI took my phones. They took my computers. They had everything. They had all my phone calls, my records, and the voicemail was still on my phone. And so, people are like, "Oh, you turned this voice message over to the FBI." I'm like, I think they know she was inside the building, and they had my phone. There was no choice here. Dr. Gold, would you like to speak to this issue?
Yeah, I just want to say something. So Brandon told me when I got out that this was a thing. And I honestly, I couldn't even understand what you were saying, Brandon, when you said it. I mean, you remember my reaction, like, what are you talking about? So first of all, clue number one, if the left-wing media is all of a sudden having sympathy for Dr. Simone Gold, we have to know that there is some other thing going on there. That's not like a reality check. Number two, to Derrick's point, I agree completely. I would have never had any problem with anybody saying anything that was truthful to whoever they had to say it to get their situation heard. So had Brandon, I mean, I wasn't there, Brandon, when you spoke, but you know what I said to you? I said, and as Derrick is saying, everybody has to talk to the FBI. So you say truthful things. And if in that telling something happened that I truthfully did and you truthfully said it, that would have been fine anyway. But from my perspective, I had no issue past, present, or I'm sure future with Brandon. I don't think Brandon did anything wrong. I was arrested based upon the government's interpretation of my actions. I was arrested before Brandon was arrested. I did call him on January 6th. There was a phone message from me to him on his phone. Those are factually true statements. To the extent that those factually true statements hurt me more or hurt him, I don't know. They're factually true. I wouldn't have any objection. That's what it was. And I never blamed you, Brandon, for one moment for anything. And I think it's just the take-home message is just don't believe anything that the media is saying. I mean, they were creating a fabricated story, to sow division, as you said. It's a big nothing.
That's the take-home message from the whole event. Like, the whole J6 story, top to bottom, is so dishonest. It's such a fabrication. And I was mentioning how I actually went to trial, and one of the interesting things at the trial is that they bring out all of these police officers to tell these dramatic, Oscar-worthy winning performance stories about the travesty of the day. And no one is trying to say that the day didn't get rowdy and unreasonable and bad things happened and some violence was committed and etc. Okay, that's fine. But that's not what this is about. This is about a lot of people being not just slightly dishonest, but I don't even know what the word for it is. It's the most egregious and destructive amount of dishonesty I've ever experienced in my life. And it's all been developed and fabricated and leveraged, and it's all been constructed on purpose for a reason. It's just so dishonest. It's such an enormous lie. And that's
so for example,
I'll be really quick. You know what I think it is, John? And if anyone disagrees, please say so. But I think it's the realization for a lot of us that they don't even really care about us. I don't believe that they care that I stood outside the building. I don't believe that they care that Dr. Gold went inside and gave a speech. I think that we're all pawns in this pursuit of Donald Trump. I think we're all just collateral damage in this maniacal hatred and pursuit of Donald Trump. And I think that's part of when you're kind of sitting there trying to articulate like the dishonesty of it. I think it's just knowing that your life has been shattered and destroyed, and it's not, they don't even care. They're doing it because it's another trophy in their hunt, in their pursuit of Donald Trump. And they don't even give a shit that this
Yep.
has happened to you.
Yep. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about facts. They don't care about anything except what they want to achieve.
Hey, Brandon. Kyle wanted to join in, and I just wanted to chime in and see if you want me to bring him up as a speaker.
Kyle who?
I don't know how to pronounce Seraphin, the
Well,
FBI agent, retired FBI agent.
yes, at the end we'll take some questions and we'll bring some people up, but I want to just continue telling stories for the time being.
Could
Please.
I share a little bit of Mark? I don't know if you've heard of. Do you know Mark Abraham? I just thought I would mention his story. So Mark Abraham is another very interesting kind of story, and it. By the way, I agree with you that this really had nothing to do with us. I don't think they really cared about us, and I do think they had other agendas. But Mark Abraham is a very interesting story. So I may get some little details wrong, but he was a federal DEA agent. He had served in Afghanistan, former military, et cetera, was proud to serve as a DEA agent. And he was there on January 6th. And again, please forgive me, I might have some of the facts wrong, but I believe he was carrying a weapon because he always carried a weapon. And his brother, I believe, is also, if not in the DA, but another branch where he's also allowed to carry a weapon. And there they were on January 6th. But not anything violent, not anything, but he was there. But he ended up taking a photo, and I guess in the photo you could see he had a weapon. Nothing happened. He, goes about his business after January 6th, not arrested, nothing. He wasn't in the building, nothing. But he ends up going on Tucker, I think it was around March or April of 2020, and speaking out for the J6 defendants, right? And just speaking out. He's a very mild-mannered individual. And then within a week or two, he's, violently arrested, the whole bit. So it's very clear that it all had to do with free speech. It had to do with the fact that he went on Tucker and spoke. His brother, who was with him in the photo, again, forgive me if I got some details wrong, but his brother who's with him, to this day, was never arrested, is still working in his government job. So, of course, Mark Abraham's life has been completely destroyed, where, of course, he was let go from his DEA position, evicted, just absolutely everything horrible that could happen to a person, charged with, a 10 or 15-year felony. And the only difference between him and his brother is that he went on Tucker. And I just want to throw that out there because you were looking, for January 6th stories, and he's not with us tonight, but just keep your ears peeled because he is going to trial. Mark Abraham will be going to trial. I don't know when, but I wanted to share that with you and just kind of, I hope everybody listens for his story because it's particularly terrible.
Thank you. And so everyone knows, Dr. Gold and John Strand were both charged with, they had identical charges, which were 4 misdemeanors and 1 felony. Dr. Gold ended up taking a plea deal and pleading to a misdemeanor, a single misdemeanor. John decided to go to trial. He's the only one here on the panel tonight who actually went to trial and faced what that experience was like. So Kyle, I see that you have your hand up. I'm going to go to you because I don't know if you have a question or a comment, but then John, I would really love for you to speak to everybody about the experience of going to trial, what the result was, what you have coming up, what the jury pool selection was like. Please let everyone know the entire thing. But Kyle, please go ahead.
Hey, Brandon, thanks for the opportunity. Hey, first of all, I just want to say my heartfelt just sorrow for all of the things that you guys have gone through. I saw it on the back end working for the FBI. And Dr. Gold, when you're talking about Mark Abraham, I actually met up with him in Phoenix at America Fest. We had about an hour-long conversation. His brother was an FBI agent. His brother and him were in the same role. It's the 1811 federal role, which is the criminal investigator special agent. They're both authorized to carry a weapon anywhere in this country. As an FBI agent, I carried a gun on a plane. I've carried AR-15s and backpacks on planes when we've gone, and he's allowed to carry them around the Capitol grounds. There's no, I've done that as well because we've done low visibility roles. So the fact that Mark Abraham was arrested for that and he's been charged, he's obviously very distraught about it. We had a long form conversation, and he's a patriot. He served his country pretty honorably. His brother doesn't speak to him anymore. He's at my former agency, and it just shows you how sad and pathetic it is that people are not willing to stand up and do the right thing, even for their own freaking brother, which makes you want to puke. I've got friends who retired over all of your situations. I got to speak to Derrick the other day as well. But I'm just letting you know it's not universal within the agency there. There's a big divide that's happening, and the people that are in it that are nauseated by what's happened, there doesn't seem to be any other recourse, because they're going to still get these pawns to come after you, to knock your doors down, that are going to say yes, that don't seem to either know what the hell is going on, and that seems to be some of it, or they don't care, or they're ideologically aligned with what's happening. And it's all sickening. But you're absolutely correct that this punishment equals the process, or the process equals the punishment for you. That is what's going on. You're not, outside the range of what's your experience is accurate. And that's, I just wanted to kind of support that.
Thank you, Kyle. Oh, real quick, John, before you get started, just once again, if everyone could please, if you would take a moment, you guys, and just tweet out the space, tell people to join us. We've held on to our audience pretty well through this whole thing so far. But please just let everyone know. And guys, also follow everybody who's up here in the speaker box tonight. Please give everyone a follow. John, please go ahead.
Thanks, Brandon. And Kyle, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I also was able to speak with Mark at AmFest recently, and I'm really proud of him and glad to be supportive. I think what your comment was interesting about a divide in the FBI and agencies, where some people don't agree with the corruption and weaponization. And I would just encourage and issue a challenge to any of those people that if that's how they feel, then they should act on it. They should take some action. They should take some real action. And I normally wouldn't be the kind of person that tries to say, you need to do such and such. I try to just do what God's called me to do. But I think we're moving into a different time and space a little bit, and it's getting a little bit more severe. And we all need to realize that if we don't each individually decide what we know is right and wrong, and then act according to that, then our time's very short. So I just want to say that to start. But the fact that I went to trial is interesting, and going through the trial was extremely difficult and very profound. I've never experienced anything like that. An immense amount of pressure mentally and spiritually, and a lot of work and preparation intellectually, and it was very difficult. But one of the most amazing parts of the trial, honestly, was the very first day. So the very first day is jury selection. And I was flabbergasted. When I made the decision to reject the plea deal and go to trial, which I did over a year ago, I was under no disillusion about this situation. I knew that I was guilty on arrival. That is absolutely the fact. And I just want to say right now, because I did not accept a plea deal, so I can speak more freely, I guess, than those who did. But I would just like to say that it's very clear the people speaking tonight, Dr. Gold, Brandon, who didn't even walk inside the building, Derrick, who served honorably and elected in office and supports the Constitution and what it means. All of these people clearly are innocent and honorable, patriot American citizens. They are not criminals. So I just want to say that's just obvious, and I feel like I can say it. And I can say it for myself too, because I know myself, and I know what I did and what I didn't do on January 6th. I was completely innocent, and that's why I refused the plea deal, and that's why I went to trial. But I didn't go to trial thinking that I was going to quote unquote win, because like Brandon has said very truthfully, there's no winning here. This is a matter of how badly you lose in practical terms. So I went to trial knowing I was going to be guilty anyway, but I was still shocked on the first day where the jury was selected. And it did not seem like a courtroom and a environment where you were trying to determine a group of people to make reasonable, fair, unbiased decisions about the facts of a situation and render a fair and honest judgment. It was entirely like a casting room for a reality television show. And I mean, these people were lined up out the door by, a quarter mile around the block to get in the building that day. There were so many people because there were a number of J6 trials happening the same day. And all of these people clearly were desperate to get selected to be on the jury panel for this trial in order to, apply their fury at someone who dared to speak against what they felt was, whatever the correct version of their opinion or the political situation. So all of these people had to ask, or they had to be interviewed and ask or answer various questions. And I asked my attorney to ask the prospective jurors one question consistently. I said, please ask this question every time. And he did most of the time. And that was, do you believe that the defendant, John Strand, or any person, do you assume that they're guilty just because they were there? Does being inside the building automatically mean they're guilty of a crime? And almost every single one of them said yes. A few said no, but most of them said yes, and most of them said it automatically, like, well, of course, if he was inside, he was guilty, which is not legally actually the case. And that would render them not necessarily unbiased, obviously. And yet the judge allowed most of those people to be on the jury pool. And in addition, some of these people were in tears and crying, and it was very melodramatic, and it was very just obviously an emotional and ideological situation where these people really wanted to be a part of this environment and this situation to express themselves and extract, their emotional experience for what they believed in, not because they were trying to participate in an unbiased and fair jury of peers, which is what the Constitution is supposed to guarantee us. So that was day one, and incredibly interesting about the trial and incredibly disheartening. The trial went from there for another, and the whole thing was, I think, 8 days, grueling. There were 9 government witnesses, I believe. So that's 8 police officers and an FBI special agent. The performances, as I said earlier, were Oscar nominated, just unbelievable performances, very, very dramatic. And I also want to say, for the record, because I believe this is true, that some of the testimony was heartfelt and authentic and honest. And some of these police officers clearly experienced situations and moments of fear and distress. And January 6th was not a pretty picture. It was not a good situation, obviously. And so it's important for us to recognize that and acknowledge that as we speak through these things. This is going back to your point about nuance, Brandon. And that is important. So that was also a really profound experience for me in the trial, to hear from these people and to see it from their perspective. And I felt like I was able to get more nuance and greater perspective and some empathy for people, quote unquote, on the other side. But that does not negate the total dishonesty of the greater story. It does not take away from the I don't know what the words are, egregious, diabolical, just enormous corruption of the DOJ specifically as an institution, and just our government and mainstream media generally in propagating this totally fallacious story that is destroying so many people's lives, myself and a lot of people on here included. So a lot of dishonesty, but that doesn't take away from the fact that some people experienced violence and pain and distress. And so that was another part of the trial that was interesting. And then the really interesting part was taking the stand myself. And I was very grateful for the opportunity to do that. Like I said, I knew I was guilty on arrival. I was under no disillusions that this trial was going to go any other way than what it did. But nevertheless, I know the truth of the matter. I know the facts on the ground where I was. I know what I did and what I didn't do. And I am firmly committed to testifying to the truth. So I testified to the truth about my story and my situation and my experience on that day. And that was about almost 4 hours on the stand. And the prosecution is not friendly. They are very, very nasty people, and incredibly dishonest as well. So that's disheartening. But nevertheless, thankfully, God is gracious, and he was supportive and protecting of me as I went through that experience, and just shared my testimony of what I knew happened or didn't happen, what I did or didn't do. And I shared that to the best of my ability, and that was the trial.
So can you let everyone know what the result was and what you have coming up?
Sure. Spoiler alert, I was convicted on all 5 charges, which includes, as Derrick and the others mentioned, a ridiculous 20-year prison felony for obstruction of an official proceeding, which is actually the wrong statute technically and legally. As Dr. Gold made mention, they charged everyone with 1512. The actual title of the statute, if you look it up, is witness tampering. Obviously, there were no witnesses there. It was not a courtroom. And 1505 is a statute that is more appropriate and technically accurate to the situation, but that only offered them a few years of prison to swing over people's heads with like a bat. So they reached past that to grab this 20-year felony for witness tampering, which is absurd. Not to mention that most of us had no idea any proceeding of any kind was happening. Most of us weren't even assuming we would be inside the building. We were just, on the grounds generally because there was supposed to be a speech there. So convicted of a 20-year felony plus 4 misdemeanors. So that's 23 or 24 years of total prison time. And that's what I was convicted of. And so I'm facing a sentencing that was coming up actually this month. It looks like it'll be delayed slightly. And so I'm waiting to find out when it will actually happen. But that's what's coming next, is a sentencing where a judge decides how badly he wants to punish me based on these convictions that have been handed down. And then at that point, I will be able to file an appeal, which I will be filing because, as I mentioned, I'm actually innocent. So
Thank you, John. I want to say that of all the defendants, they all, obviously, the ones like us, no violence, nothing like that, should never have been charged and, of course, never be convicted. But even of that whole group, I actually thought John was the most likely to be acquitted, because the hatred by the DC jury pool is so much against Trump and the MAGA movement, and we happened to be there on a health freedom movement. And John's, completely not violent, never been arrested, all that stuff. If there was ever going to be a defendant who's going to be acquitted, it was really going to be him. And in fact, Mother Jones was sitting there, and they thought he was going to get it. We all thought this was going to be like the one acquittal that was going to happen. I do think, John handled himself incredibly well, polite, respectful. And it appeared that the judge himself was a little bit shocked when all the convictions came in. Despite everything I'd been through, despite the overcharging from the prosecution, despite the fact that the judge permitted all sorts of things to happen that shouldn't have happened, despite all of this, I was stunned that John was convicted on everything for just very basic reasons. Maybe you can say a jury doesn't know what the word obstruction means, but everybody knows what the word disorderly means, and everybody knows what the word violent means. And how you could have a videotape of his entire time there, my time as well, and there's no violence and there's no disorderly, and then have a jury convict you of things that contain words of violent and disorderly. It was absolute proof that it's totally impossible to get justice in DC by a DC jury or DC judge. Totally. It's like, in other words, we need to get over the fantasy that you can get justice. I mean, Brandon, you had it right when you said it was lose or lose. I was stunned. I was stunned. Maybe I was naive, but I just want to share that with people, that I think one of the most dangerous things you can do is put your body physically in a hard blue jurisdiction. I don't believe I'm ever going to set foot in DC again or similar areas, because I think the odds, if you get arrested, there's absolutely no justice, and we're foolish to think that there might be. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. I have a suggestion. So why don't I would like to maybe one by one just tell everyone, what did you ultimately end up getting convicted of, and what was your sentence for that conviction? And then if you guys are on board, maybe we could take some questions from people, because they've just been very patiently listening. I don't know what everyone's schedule is like, but if we can, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes or something, or however much time you have, we could take some questions. Okay, Derrick's on board. All right, sounds good. Dr. Gold, can you tell us what did you ultimately get convicted of and what was your sentence?
So remember, John, as you said, John and I had the exact same charges. John was actually working for me, so keep that in mind when you consider that they offered both of us a plea for single misdemeanor. The misdemeanor carried a range of 0 to 6 months. Nonviolent first-time misdemeanor offense, I fully expected to get 0. I was instead given 60 days in federal penitentiary. I can hardly say that word. I ended up, as previous people have said, it's very, very scary when you are going off to prison. I also was not being sent to a minimum security place. I was sent to FDC Miami, which takes minimum, low, medium, and maximum security prisoners. So that's where I was sent. It was very scary. I also was put into isolation for 8 days under quote unquote COVID restrictions. And I won't belabor it. It's an absurd situation, but when you look in the context of all the January 6th defendants, I suppose it's about in line with what what you're getting. But if you consider the fact that John was offered the same plea, right, which meant he would have gotten 60 days or less, the judge certainly would not have given him more than he gave me, because the judge definitely saw me as the problem and John just is working for me. And instead, John is now facing a situation of 24 years. I think that fact also speaks to the corruption throughout the system, because I don't think it's possible that you can simultaneously say somebody, i.e. John, could take 60 days, but, oh, by the way, you could also take 20 years. One of those facts cannot be true. But I served my 60 days at FTC Miami. Thank you.
Derrick?
Yeah. So I ultimately pled guilty to the felony civil disorder charge, which put me at 0 to 6 months instead of 24 years, and ended up getting sentenced to 3 months in prison. And was told originally by my attorney that, and it's not his fault. He really believed this, as I think most of us did, that, hey, don't worry, you're going to a camp. It's no big deal. And then you find out that you're going to actual prison, which it was still a low, but still you're going to the actual prison. And so that's where I went. The other thing was, and they've been doing it to pretty much all the J6ers, from what I understand, is there's a FCI low 25 minutes from my house, which I requested to be sent to make it easier for my family, and instead I had to go 6.5 hours away one way to Michigan to go to prison. And so, yeah, I went there. I spent the first 8 days in solitary confinement because I refused the COVID vaccine. It was amazing how they tried to hold that over my head and try to coax me into getting it. And I said, that's okay. I'll serve the full 3 months in solitary confinement before I take that shot from you guys. And so spent 8 days in there, had 8 days with no phone call. I got one shower at the very end, like the last day. So I went 7 days, I think it was, with no shower or anything. Was supposed to get out at least every other day for a 15-minute shower, but didn't even get that. Had no book for the first 4 days. Didn't have anything. That was pretty mentally challenging, to be honest with you guys. I remember that luckily I was on the 3rd floor, and I could look out my cell and across. It's not really a hallway, but like across the floor, and then there was the bars, and you could see outside, and out that window I could see shadows from like the fire hydrant. There was a tree that was there, and I remember, you got to remember, there's no concept of time in prison, especially in solitary confinement, and so if you took a nap, you didn't know if you slept 20 minutes or 2 hours or 20 hours. There was no concept of time, and I can't describe to you guys just what that feels like and how slow that time goes by. And so that was really important for me. So I would watch the shadows, and when the shadow got to a very distinct place, maybe the fire hydrant touching the sidewalk, or the shadow from the tree touching the wall of the building, I would ask the CO, and they'd go by and say, hey, CO, what time is it? And they'd give me the time. And then about around the 4th day, I was able to tell the time throughout most of the day by looking out and seeing the shadows. And that really made the next 4 days so much easier. And I'll never forget, on my 5th day is when I received my first letter. And it was such a big milestone for me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can get mail in here, in solitary confinement. And it was from a random person out there across the country who took the time to write me a letter. And it's funny that I ended up receiving lots of letters. I've spoken about this quite often, but me and that gentleman have remained in contact even after getting out, just because it ended up being such a big part of my life in terms of helping me get through prison. And that letter that I received that day was really, to me, it was a gift from God. It was my first contact from the outside world. I just can't even explain what that meant. So all of you guys listening, I really encourage you to please take the time and go to the patriotmailproject.com and just go there. It's a database of all the political prisoners right now and their addresses, and just take a few minutes and write them a letter. It doesn't have to be anything long. It doesn't take very much to buy a stamp, and send them a letter and just let them know that they have your support. Because, once again, it's very lonely as a January 6th defendant. And I broke my prison days up in sections. So the first part of the day is when I had my 15-minute phone call with my wife. And after that, I would look forward to 4 o'clock every single day, because at 4 o'clock was mail call, and I knew I was going to get mail from random American patriots all across the country, and that was my second wind for the day, if you will. But I spent most of my time trying to study the Bible, get closer to God, grow as an individual, study as much as I could about the Constitution, and then I really took the opportunity to get around and actually ask questions and get to know some of the people who are in there, as well as share the word of God with people in prison. I thought it was going to be a unique opportunity that I would never have that opportunity again, and so I thought that I would take advantage of that. I went in with the mentality that I was not going to let them, the government, steal 3 months of my life away from me. It sucked. It was hard. It wasn't fun. But I went in with the mentality of, I'm going to make use of this 3 months of time, and I'm going to impact someone's life. I'm going to impact myself. I'm going to come out stronger and better in one way or another. And that's what I chose to do. And, I'm proud of, I'm not proud that I went to prison, but I'm proud of the things that I was able to accomplish in prison, and some of the people I got to meet. And really quick, I just want everyone to know that, if there's one thing that could come of this. I was trying to tell a radical leftist this earlier today in a space, actually. This has put a big spotlight on the massive criminal justice reform that is needed in this country. And it's one of those things that I always knew it was needed. Like, I always knew it, but I don't guess I really truly understood how bad it really was until you go through that system yourself. And, quite frankly, before I went into prison, I thought that I was going to meet maybe 10% of the people, and they were going to be good people who didn't deserve to be there. And honestly, it was the other way around. Outside of the child molesters that were in there were a lot, surprisingly. Outside of those people, I would say that 90% of the people, even if they deserved to be there, they were way overcharged, just like the rest of us were. And that was very eye-opening to me. And really quick, I'll just share a really quick example. There's a guy I met in there who was very, very good to me in there. Really quick, prison is a place where, and I'm sure Dr. Gold could agree with this as well, and anybody else who's been there. It's one of those places where, everybody has the same amount of clothes or spending limits. You meet people in the rawest form of them as an individual person. There's not, you don't have anything really. Everybody's at their lowest point, so you get to really meet and know people on that the rawest form, if that makes sense. And so this guy, though, in his early 20s, he had committed some crimes in his early 20s. He's in his 60s now. He'd never been in any more trouble after that. He went 3 decades with no trouble. The feds raided his house, thinking that he had a meth lab there, which he did not. They didn't find anything, any drugs at all. They had nothing there. But when they were there, they found a box of ammunition that he says it wasn't even functioning. But that's irrelevant to me at this point. They found a box of ammunition, and because of that, and he's a felony in possession of ammunition, and because of his previous criminal convictions when he was in his early 20s, he's now considered a career criminal, and they sentenced him to 15 years in prison. And I just thought this was absolutely insane to me. And these are some of the things that are happening right now in this country. And I just wanted to take a moment to share that with everybody.
So Brandon, I know we have a lot of people to get through, but I have to say something. Derrick, I couldn't agree more with you. What I saw I feel like a big chunk of what I have to do in the future when I have a moment is turn my attention to the prison reform. It's unbelievable how many people in prison that shouldn't be in prison. It's unbelievable, unconscionable. This is something that politically conservative people need to get a hold of. We tend to think, people on the left are talking about criminal justice reform, but they're kind of emphasizing the whole. It's like they want to unleash a lot of violent criminals on society, but that's not what's happening. What I'm talking about is there's so many people, maybe even the majority. Again, I was in the female side. I can't speak to the male, but there were so many people in my side. I would have said for sure it was the majority that should not be there. Now, who they were when they got arrested, I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the people that were there that I saw in front of me, that were overcharged, that were not violent, that the dysfunction of our criminal justice system, just to put people away behind bars. And I've said this to a lot of members of my team because I don't talk about this so much publicly. But when you're confused about what to do about something, you really should go back to the Bible and see, what does the Bible say about this thing? It turns out there's no biblical precedent for long incarcerations. The Bible believes in corporal punishment, monetary punishment first, corporal punishment, like you can strike somebody or whip somebody, and capital punishment. But there really is no biblical precedent for long incarceration. But we're routinely putting people in prison for years and years or decades even, and throwing away the key. This is unconscionable. If you believe in God and man is made in God's image, then you understand that if you interrupt someone's life, by a 10-year sentence or 15-year sentence, and you've stopped them from doing whatever God has destined for that person. And this is unconscionable. And this is something that we really have to look at and pay attention to. And Derrick, I'm right there with you. And this is something I'm very passionate about, as are you. Thank you for listening.
So I'll share my sentence, and then Geri, since sadly Matthew is not with us and we can't talk about his sentence, perhaps you could tell us about the Matthew Perna Act, if you would like to. I think that'd be a nice thing to share with people. And if you don't have the details in front of you, Geri, I do, so I can read the details if you don't have them. But I was initially charged with several felonies and a misdemeanor. I took a misdemeanor plea deal. I was convicted on one single Class B misdemeanor for disorderly conduct, and I also have no prior criminal record. This is a first offense charge for me. I was sentenced to 3 months of house arrest, 3 years of federal probation. The government actually didn't request a fine, but the judge imposed on her own the maximum fine of $5,000. I was ordered to pay $500 restitution to the Capitol, although it was acknowledged that I didn't engage in any vandalism or destruction to the Capitol. And I also was given court-ordered mental health services. So I had to go to court-ordered therapy because I voted for Donald Trump. So obviously I'm insane. And this, of course, was after I had already spent 2.5 days in jail on my single misdemeanor, Class B misdemeanor first offense. So yeah, that was my sentence. And there was one other thing I was going to say. It'll come back to me. Geri, are you cool with telling us about that?
Yes, and if you have the details in front of you, that
I
would be
do.
great, because I don't have them with me.
Could you at least share how it came to be?
Yes. Shortly after Matt hung himself, I was reached out to by Congressman Louis Gohmert's office, and I was asked if I would come to DC because they were holding a press conference. Andy Biggs was there, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Louis Gohmert. And I accepted the invitation, and I came to DC, and I spoke in front of the Capitol in the rain. And I told Matt's story. And afterwards, I asked Congressman Gohmert what was going to happen next. I said, because I wanted Matthew to not have died in vain. And I didn't want to see any other family suffer like this. And at the same time, even though a pardon was really not going to do any good for Matt, I was going to seek a pardon down the road when we had an actual president in office. And I wanted to know if he would assist with that. And shortly thereafter, his office contacted me and told me that they were drafting a bill in Matt's name. And it is the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act of 2022. And if Brandon, you would give some of the details, I can elaborate on them.
Absolutely. I've got it right here. So I'm just going to read directly from the post that I have here. It says, here are the details of the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act of 2022, which Representative Gomert is introducing. The bill ensures that the political persecution we've seen in the aftermath of J6 is further impeded by the law. The bill, named after Matthew Perna, whose unjust treatment led to his utter hopelessness and the end of his life, makes the following reforms. Prohibits detention for nonviolent political protesters, including the allowance of civil action for any violations, ensures speedy trials for nonviolent political protesters, provides remedies for malicious prosecution, I almost said persecution, limits the use of national security authorities against citizens of the United States, limits the use of national defense or foreign policy justifications as a shield by which the government can deny U.S. citizens requests to know whether or not he or she is being surveilled/investigated by his or her own government, includes a sense of Congress that for any defendant sentenced for covered political protest offense, a judge should impose a sentence that is consistent with the minimum sentence provided by the guideline range applicable to the defendant, and permits the transfer of venue in the criminal trial of any individual for the commission of the criminal defense in D.C.
Well, that very last one that you read about permitting the trial to be held outside of D.C., if you think about that one, if that had actually been a law during all of this mess, people would have received fair trials, and people like my nephew would not have had to plead guilty out of fear of not receiving a fair trial. That last one is a huge one, because they know that by trying these people in D.C., they're not going to get a fair trial, and they're going to be prosecuted to the maximum extent. The other one that you read about fair punishment, that's another one. I mean, when you're talking about people who committed minor misdemeanors and they're going to jail for upwards of 10 years, this all came about because when Merrick Garland took over in the DOJ, prior to him taking over, I don't know if everybody remembers Paul Hodgkins. He was from Tampa, and he was the very first person to plead guilty and get sentenced. Well, this is before Merrick Garland was in charge. I can't remember the name of the person in charge prior to Merrick Garland. The name escapes me. But Paul Hodgkins had the same exact charges that Matt did, and he was given 8 months in jail. 8 months. After Merrick Garland took the position, it was announced that the sentences would be consistent with one another, and that anybody charged with a felony would serve at least 48 months in jail. So they changed the rules when he took his position. And basically that is one of the things covered in the Matthew Perna bill is just punishments for, the punishment has to fit the crime. The other major thing that I pushed for with Congressman Gomert in Matt's case was the addition of the sentencing enhancement. And that is in those things that you read off, Brandon. It's just in legal terms that they are not allowed to just pull something out at the 11th hour that your attorney isn't going to be able to defend, and it influences the judge to give a harsher sentence. The other part about having a due process, the delays and the postponements that Matt and many of the J6ers were facing are what broke him down mentally. There was never an end in sight, it seemed. Even his sentencing enhancement was postponed a month more. They just want to drag this out and punish these people prior to them receiving their punishment. They're punishing them mentally and physically. And The other thing that I don't think people realize is every time there's a delay or every time there's a motion filed, it makes the local newspaper in whatever small town you live in. And it just adds to the anxiety. It adds to the stress. It adds to the mental breakdown. And our town was small. Matt grew up in a small area of Pennsylvania, and our local newspaper was brutal. It was brutal. And our local news stations were equally as bad. There wasn't a truthful story told about Matt until Tucker Carlson invited me on his show. The other thing was I wrote Matt's obituary, and it was probably the longest obituary that newspaper had ever printed. And they edited the obituary before they printed it. They told the funeral director that there were 2 lines in my obituary that were not fact. It's an obituary. The 2 lines they refused to print was many people were responsible for Matt's death. And the other line was Matt walked in through an open door at the Capitol. They wouldn't put that in his obituary. I mean, even in death, they were trying to censor us and control the narrative. So the bill, I hope to God, becomes law someday. I don't know what's going to happen with this Congress that we have. I don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't have much hope for this to get passed into law. I hope that it does, because it could mean a lot for people down the road. And if there's anything good that can come out of Matt's death, it would be that.
Thank you, Geri. And thank you for bringing up the point about the delays, and that the delays, first of all, the delays by themselves are just excruciating, emotionally excruciating, because you really do believe that you're reaching an end point. And then they come back and they wait until like the 89th day to come back and say, oh, we need to delay another 90 days. In my case, they delayed 90 days 5 times on my misdemeanor case. 5 times. And every time I thought I would get to the end of that 3 months and think that was going to be the end. And to your point, every time there's a delay or any stupid little update in your case, it brings a whole nother wave of horrible media stories. And they know what they're doing with the wording that they choose, because they'll say, another delay in the case of a man who played a role in the deadly insurrection on January 6th. And well, what was my role? What was my role in the deadly insurrection of January 6th? You know, they don't say in the case of a man who stood outside the Capitol shooting a video. They say a man who was involved had a role in the deadly insurrection, and it starts again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And to Derrick's point, I mean, if you're somebody who's not media savvy, I mean, it was torture for me. And I mean, believe me, I've had some very dark thoughts over the last couple of years. But I mean, if you're somebody who's a private person living a private life, and you're just thrown into this situation, Matthew is not the only person who made this tragic choice. And it's understandable why. I mean, these people are literally being bullied to death.
Let me say this, after Matthew committed suicide, somebody reached out to me. I don't know, I think it was on Telegram or Twitter. No, it wouldn't have been Twitter. It would have been Telegram probably, or Facebook. And they told me that their neighbor had found out that their picture was on the FBI website. And he didn't even wait to be arrested. He shot himself in the head that day. So there are people who have committed suicide that we don't even know about from January 6th. And the thing about, you were saying about the newspaper, every single time they reported on Matt's story, they said he broke into the Capitol. Matthew Perna broke into the Capitol during the insurrection. It was a blatant lie. He didn't break into anything, but they used that line over and over and over again. And nobody seems to be accountable for these lies.
Do we want to take some questions? Nick, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'm proud of you. Thank you. Let's take a few hands if people want.
Well, yeah, while you're getting that up, I just want to remind everyone that, for some people out there, it's been 2 years, but some people are still getting arrested today. So for some people, it literally just started, where some of us have just got out of prison. I got out of prison at the end of October, so it's not been 2 years for me. And I think that a lot of people who're not involved in this don't really understand that. I mean, there was a 70-year-old grandma just arrested like a week or so ago. It's the 10th or 12th day for her. It's not the 2-year anniversary for her. So I just want to remind people of that.
You just stressed me out by saying that. That's you took me back to like my 10th day or my 12th day, and I'm just like, my God, I could never do this again.
Yeah, and I wanted to say I put up in the nest. I hope it's okay, Brandon. Some people had DM'd me about how to write a prisoner in prison, the Patriot Mail Project. I put a tweet up there in the nest, which is, if you don't know what the nest is, it's right above Brandon's head there, and it's just a tweet that shows how to write a prisoner in prison. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. Nick, did you want to choose some people, or do you want me to?
Yep. So I just brought up Todd.
Okay, great.
Hopefully he's connecting right now. Todd, in order, you just have to accept the. Yep, there you are.
Did you guys call on me? Sorry, I didn't hear that part.
Yes. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
great. Hi. Okay. I don't really have a question. I just want to thank all the people that came tonight, and it's been, especially Geri, your story. I don't think there was a dry eye in the space tonight as you told it, and I just can't thank you enough for sharing your story with us. Derrick touched on the letter writing. I've been doing that, and I got to tell you, I encourage everybody to take 15 minutes out of your day and write one of these prisoners a letter. You will be surprised. I could just speak for myself, but as I was writing these letters, like, words just kind of flow out, and it's a really good feeling because you're doing something good for somebody who at the other end is going to get a little joy in their day. So I encourage anyone to just take some time to write these guys. It's especially emotional for me because I was at January 6th, and I have a certain amount of guilt because this could have been me. I didn't do anything less than what Brandon did, but Brandon's famous, and so he paid a price. And but it's funny, not funny, but he mentioned that he had PTSD. Even myself, 2 years later, every time the Amazon guy comes to my door, when I hear the knock at the door, I have a little panic because until I look out the window to see that it's not the FBI, and I don't know when that's going to stop because they've just announced that they're going to arrest 2,000 more people. So, my day may come, but I will tell all of you who've told your story tonight, it's given me strength to know that we can get through this if the worst happens. So thank you all so much, and it's Brandon. You've done a wonderful job of orchestrating this space. The way you ran it was really great. I like how you kind of came back around to everybody. So thank you to all. God bless.
Thank you, Todd. We love you, by the way. Thanks so much.
Agreed.
Can we bring some more people up, Nick?
Yep. Lee Brennan, I just allowed you to become a speaker.
And Kyle, please feel free to chime in again too if if people have questions and stuff.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. This is John Conyer. John K is my Twitter handle. Third generation veteran. Thank everybody for their stories. It's very heartbreaking. My grandfather served in Normandy. This is not the America we fought for. I fought in the '91 Gulf War. I appreciate everything you're doing. Are there any legal firms that are specifically helping January 6th defendants?
There's individual criminal defense attorneys who are very, very committed. I don't know of any. It's usually the independent
I
person.
think Geri could probably speak to that.
Yes, actually, Patriot Freedom Project is an organization that was started by Cynthia Hughes, and they have raised money. I know Dinesh D'Souza made a huge donation to them twice now, and they have raised money to help the families of J6ers with their expenses and with their attorney fees. And they have several attorneys that work with them that they help match up with J6ers. And every day they get new requests from new people who have been arrested. So patriotfreedomproject.com is an excellent source for financial help and also moral support. They have a support group, and people can actually adopt a family on their website to help them, because you have to understand, these are husbands and fathers that are in jail. Their families have lost their income. They've lost their health insurance. They've lost so many things, and they don't know where to turn. So there is actually this organization that helps them.
What can you say it again, or could we post that to the top?
It is patriotfreedomproject.com.
Geri, could you, well, you're new to Twitter, I think, or sort of. Or can you tweet about that and then we can put it in the nest?
Sure, I can.
Yeah, just tweet out the link and then we'll add it to the top.
I apologize. Since I was kicked off Twitter 2 years ago and just recently opened a new account, I forgot how it operated. So I'm sorry for that.
I'll try to put it up. I've got the link, so I'll try to put that up.
Great, thank you.
All right, next person is Lee. Lee, what's your question?
Yeah, just wanted to share how just heartbreaking all this is. It's something that's been on my heart for the last year. Just praying for these people. It's hard to wrap your head around, what's being done to people that don't deserve it. But really, I just want to know what we can do. I mean, do we just sit back as a people and do nothing and allow it to just go on? What can we do? Because I fear it's only going to get worse if they're allowed to just continue to do this to people.
Well,
that's about it.
Lee, I think that even what's happening right now in this debate for Speaker of the House, I see a lot of people, conservatives, and a lot of conservatives who are America First conservatives, who are, basically having this attitude of like, let's get going, vote for McCarthy, let's go, let's just, these people are holding out, what are they doing? They're whatever. And I'm like, you guys, this is, sorry, but I mean, I can tell you there's a very small handful of Congress people who've expressed any interest in helping us. And most of them are the people who are holding out right now. And I'm not interested in rushing through a Speaker of the House and going back to the status quo and going back to business as usual. And, to Cynthia's point, she's skeptical about this new Congress. So am I. For the record, I don't believe in any of them. But I know that there's only a handful of them that we stand a shot with. And I've had conversations regularly with Matt Gaetz. I've had a couple of conversations with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I love Paul Gosar. And some of them have expressed wanting to try to put together some congressional hearings and allowing people like us to testify and at least getting another narrative, like another side of the story. Again, it's not about trying to pretend like nothing bad happened on January 6th, but it's about also trying to shine a spotlight on what the DOJ is doing, and that misdemeanor charges are being treated like acts of domestic terrorism. And but I think it is going to take time, and I don't know if DC can be saved. I know maybe it's a great question for Kyle. I mean, maybe you could touch on this, but I mean, I don't know if Washington DC can be redeemed.
Yeah, Brandon. So people need to write to their congresspeople and help tell them exactly what it is they expect. Like, they may not get that many letters at a time. They may not get that many phone calls. They may only get 50 or 100 in a day. If 75 of them are saying the same thing, they're going to start listening, because it's going to just disproportionately represent the attitudes that we need to be pushing forward. But part number one is the FBI needs to be broken into pieces. Part of the reason that you guys are a victim of what you are a victim of, and I think of it that way, is that there's a national security state. All the people that were worked and all of the supervisors that took over the January 6th case squads, they were not criminal investigative, supervisors. Their background was national security. They worked counterterrorism and they were yes people for the regime. So they got moved into these positions and they pushed you guys. They need to be tossed out on their asses. They need to be moved into a space where they have no law enforcement authority and they can go dig up information and stare at it all day if that's what they want to do. But these people are not following the constitutional oath that I signed up for, and it's really disgusting. So it doesn't matter if you're pro-life, if you're pro-Trump, if you're out there and you want to be a conservative that has a position about anything that you feel like you should voice, you should be able to do that. That's what we all signed up for. Like, that's what I grew up with. So the idea that this is not the case right now, it's because we have this out of control DOJ that's massively politicized. And that's been like 5 years. They've been like running downhill. So you got to reach out to your elected representatives, tell them exactly what you expect. And there needs to be like a church style committee that goes and just dismantles what this FBI has done. I mean, it doesn't take very many people at the top to be sending it down, but there's an awful lot of cowards that are working in there, unfortunately. There's some great people. Don't get me wrong. I'm friends with people in the FBI that don't suck. There's a lot of people that are willing to look the other way and do the wrong thing. And so we can't allow that to happen. So people got to reach out and tell their representatives exactly what it is you expect.
Who's next, Nick?
Oh, I agree. I just added you in as a speaker if you want to ask your question.
I don't know if this is me. My actual name is Jennifer. I just wanted to say how much I admire all of you guys and just how heartbreaking hearing these stories tonight has been. I am wondering from you, Geri, and what is the first small step we can take to get some judicial reform? I know I don't trust Congress to come up with a small solution. What's something we can do locally, just the smallest step that we can start to bring awareness to this problem that we have with this prosecution of our fellow citizens?
You have to be vocal. And I know a lot of people are afraid to be vocal. I know they are. And that was also the goal of January 6th. They don't want us to speak up. They want us to be complacent and fall in line. But you have to be vocal, whether it be on a local level, whether it be sharing these stories on your social media, calling your Congress people. I know that Marjorie Taylor Greene has been a huge support to the January 6ers. Andy Biggs has. Unfortunately, Louis Gohmert has finished his term. But I would concentrate on constantly calling, emailing, sending letters to your representatives and let them know that you're tired of this. But your friends also share these stories with your friends, even the ones who you don't think would listen. People have to wake up and see what's happening. You're not going to hear these stories on your news. They're not reporting them. They don't want sympathy being shown toward any of the J6ers, so they avoid these stories. That's why people are always shocked when they come to find out that people are sitting in jail now for 2 years that haven't been sentenced for anything. They don't know about it because it's not being reported. But to be vocal is probably, your voice is your strongest asset here. That's about the best advice I can give you.
May I just say something to the questioner? I know that it's scary to speak up, and I know that people don't like to do it. I want to say on a very practical level, it's my opinion that you're silencing yourself, that the government is not really coming after random people who speak up. You know, even Geri, she's the aunt of a person who was essentially murdered by the federal government, and they're not coming after her. So I just want to encourage you not just the speaker, but everybody, to actually really use your voice. So much more can be done if you don't silence yourself. Thank you.
Is it Kim up next? Nick?
Ed, I'm sorry. Yes, Kim, and then Ed.
Okay, hi guys, thank you. I just wanted to say I love all you guys, and I've been, Derrick knows who I am. I've been involved with the prisoners for a year and a half or so on the prayer calls. And Geri, I remember the day when I heard about Matthew. I didn't even know him, and I sat here and cried. And so my heart is with you. And I just wanted to say there's so much information on how to contact and how to do things for the J6ers, and it's kind of scattered. So what I did was I put a document together and I put it in a Telegram channel. And I posted that channel in the comments. I don't know how to put it in the nest, but I posted it in there. And Derrick, I tagged you and Brandon, you too, in there. So if you want to put that up in the nest, then people can click on that one link and go to that Telegram page, and it's all in there. And Geri, I'll add that site to the Telegram page or channel that you just mentioned as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And somebody just messaged me and said the site wasn't working. It is working. I just logged into it just now. So I appreciate you
Hey,
sharing
Kim,
that.
could I ask you a question before you drop down? Because we
Sure.
don't know each other. So do you feel like you learned something tonight by listening to our stories? Like, do you feel like you got information that you didn't have? Was this helpful?
Absolutely. I mean, I was on the prayer calls pretty steady for a long time, and then I started helping with convoys and stuff like that, and now election fraud. So I haven't been on the calls as much. But even so, I knew about Matthew, and I knew about Simone, and just so, I've heard pieces and parts of the stories, and I actually fill people in sometimes on stories, but even that said, I still got more pieces of the stories tonight. So yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then the last question should be Ed, and then we are a minute away from midnight, going on 4 hours. So just wanted to let you know.
All right, I promise to make it quick, and I'm hoping you guys can hear me because I don't see it flipping.
Yep.
My question is directly to Kyle. Kyle, I have many family members that are since retired because I'm old and they're old from the alphabet soup. I work currently at a local municipal level, and luckily I have a chief that defends us, all of us. But what about the right to a speedy trial? How is the government leaving these people in jail for 2 years when specifically here in my state, and I'll let you guess the state, where we just released everybody and will not refile charges because they're claiming their right to the speedy trial has been not granted. So is it different on the Fed level?
No, Ed, this is Dr. Gold. So I assume it was similar for most people. You have a constitutional right to a speedy trial, but they pressure you, your own defense team pressures you to waive that right because the government hasn't produced the evidence. So in my case, I actually said to my attorneys, I want to go quickly because I really didn't think the government wanted to come out of the gate with my case first. If I was the government, I wouldn't think I'd be the best defendant to take. So I actually thought it was strategic advantage if I went fast. But my attorneys correctly said, listen, you can't go to trial without the evidence. You never know like what they might have. I said, I know that I didn't do anything, but still they prevailed. Cooler heads prevailed, and they were right. So what happens is the government says to the judge, oh, poor us, poor little us. We just haven't had a chance to go through all of the evidence yet. And so the judge grants, if you agree to waive your right to a speedy trial, the judge just lets it go on and on and on. In my case, once the government had whatever evidence they needed, a year and a half, then my side asked for a delay and the judge said no. The judge said yes to every delay the government asked for. The judge said yes to every delay the government asked for, but when we ask for a delay, then he says no. So that's how it happens. The defendant agrees.
Yeah, and also the two softest places that the DOJ can file charges against you are in DC and New York. Those two areas are absolutely sympathetic to what the government is trying to accomplish. I don't know if you guys all know this, but all of your search warrants and your arrest warrants, the affidavits are you've probably seen them, but they're incredibly long and they're shared by like almost everybody. They're making these like long 65-page affidavits that they're just filing, and they're just everybody gets the same one. It's all a bunch of background BS about what happened on that day that may have zero to do with your case, but that's how they're getting this, and everybody is on board. It's a train of pushing this along, so that it's very sympathetic on the judge's side.
And Kyle, and I just want to share another fact that people may not know that I learned only in the last few months, which is that when you read newspaper articles saying that there's just this uptick in domestic terrorism, they're jiggering the numbers, because
Correct.
they're taking all of these cases, right? You can speak to it better than I can, but they're taking all these cases and they're pretending they're all like separate cases.
Well, this is this is what my buddy Steve Friend actually did his whistleblowing activity on. There's basically two ways that you could file this case. They could have opened one case like they did for 9/11, and they had a bunch of sub files. That's the way the FBI would do it. It'd be run out of Washington Field. They'd send leads out and ask agents to go and interview you folks and things like that. That's the way they would normally run it. The other option is they could just send a lead out to someone like me if I was in New Mexico, and they'd say, hey, go interview Coy Griffin. And I would go interview him, and I'd be shaking my head about whether he should talk to me or not. And that would go probably nowhere, because I'm not going to pursue a trespassing case, and I didn't have the bandwidth to do that. That's what's supposed to happen. Either the field office owns it and they send it out to everybody else to help their case, or they send it out to the field offices, to all of them across the country, and then each one of them runs their own cases and decide whether or not to even open them. What was going on in the January 6 cases, which is unique to the Bureau, as far as I know in its history, is they opened up a bunch of cases in DC and then sent the cases out to the field and told them to run them. And then they ran them centrally from DC. They sent orders out to field agents who should have been running their own cases. It's totally extraordinary. It's not normal, and it's not okay, because all it's shown is that there's like false number of domestic terrorism cases opened up, because that's how they have, whether they're criminal investigations, they still have like a simultaneous counterterrorism, and that's what you were experiencing at the airport, for the record, Brandon. My attorney has actually gotten stamped that way now. He just told me he got searched coming back into the country from Israel. So that's how they do it. That's what they're doing. They're falsifying these numbers by adding and making it look like, even though it was a black swan one-off event, that it is something that is across the entire United States, and that all conservatives are now, suspect of terrorism. And it's complete bullshit, unfortunately.
Dr. Gold, I have exactly, I think, the opposite opinion that you do. When you were talking about strategically pushing your trial back, my attorney also wanted me to go along with every extension that the government offered. He just kept saying, I don't want you in the first round of people who are prosecuted. His opinion was that they're going to want to get their pound of flesh with the first rounds of people who get prosecuted, no matter what. And then things are going to kind of ease up. And as time goes on, people are going to kind of start to forget about it, and it's going to soften up. Well, clearly that hasn't happened at all. I mean, nothing. 2 years later, people are still as nuts about this as they were. And again, I mean, I'm talking about even like the completely nonviolent misdemeanor trespassing charges. Like, people are absolutely as insane as they ever were. And I don't know, in retrospect, if it would have made any difference at all if I had just pushed for, because I wanted to object every time they wanted a continuance. I kept saying no, like, tell them no, like, just absolutely not. Let's go. Like, let's get this over with. And he just kept saying, no, let's just wait. It'll be better. And I mean, he ended up being shocked by the sentencing recommendation that they gave me, and then the sentence that I ultimately ended up getting. And I don't think that it would have made any difference if I had been sentenced early on.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear Kyle when he was speaking, but I just want to make sure everyone is aware that, in my opinion, that's why they're overcharging everybody as well. To what Dr. Gold had said, they don't. They come and you're facing decades in prison, and you can go to trial next week if you want to, with no defense properly in place to defend yourself, and the thumb on the scale in the trial there in DC, and probably going to be convicted for decades in prison. And that's what they're doing. They're basically forcing you. I don't want to say forcing, but that's basically, you don't really have any other choice other than to accept those extensions until you can get some evidence to mount a defense.
Also, I can tell you from personal experience that if you're actually going to trial, and facing a jury, these people are just salivating, waiting to convict you. The amount of evidence is completely irrelevant.
I will say to John's point, I don't think there's a single defendant that will ever be acquitted. I think it's utterly impossible. I think John had the strongest case just because of the facts of this. Yeah, he was working for somebody. You know what I mean? It's hopeless. What has to have happened is as Julie Kelly said, the judges are corrupted in DC. What has to happen is that the jurisdiction has to be moved, but the only one who's in charge of the jurisdiction is the judge.
Thank you.
Yeah, that I agree at that point. Julie was really smart to mention that, because obviously the jury pool is poisoned. No one is getting a fair, unbiased jury of their peers, which is a constitutional violation. But those juries are just random citizens on the street. They're not held to the same standard as a judge. And the judges have really serious implications with their behavior. I'm glad Julie brought that
This
up.
is the point I like 5 times tonight. I kept forgetting to say this, and thank you. You just reminded me. The whole point about jurisdiction. I mean, the thing is, it's so disingenuous, because a lot of these judges have even become like sort of upset at certain times and been like, they'll receive just as fair of a trial here as they would receive anywhere. Well, if that's true, then release jurisdiction. If you're not worried about it, release jurisdiction. And what's even further proof of how disingenuous they're being is that these judges aren't even releasing jurisdiction after conviction and after sentencing. This is unheard of. My probation officer told me, she was like, I have never had a case where the judge refuses to release jurisdiction. She was like, what always happens in a federal case is if you're tried outside of your jurisdiction, the moment you're sentenced and the moment you're put on probation, your probation, the jurisdiction of your probation is transferred back to your home state. So in other words, if I'm living in the state of Nebraska and God forbid I end up in violation during the course of my probation, I would go before a Nebraska judge. And the Nebraska also, you have the right during the course of your probation to apply for early termination of probation. And that would also be for a judge anywhere outside of DC if they release jurisdiction. But what's happening in every January 6th case, and again, we're talking about low-level misdemeanor charges, these judges are refusing to release jurisdiction, and then they're giving people anywhere from 3 to 5 years of probation. So if in 3 to 5 years you violate, you go back before your DC judge, and it's whatever they want to do at that point. And they're also the ones determining if you could possibly get early termination of probation, which is never going to happen. And they know this. This is the reason why they're not releasing jurisdiction. I mean, I'm telling you that even other blue areas of, I would guess that if you were living in California, if you were living in New York, if you were living in the Northeast, I don't even think the federal judges in other states would be like they are in DC. I bet that they would still be willing to early terminate probation if they said, okay, 3-year probation sentence on a misdemeanor, you've served a year and a half, you're good to go. These DC judges are never going to do it, and they know that, and that's why they're refusing to release jurisdiction. So that, to me, is the proof of how disingenuous this is. They know that judges anywhere else in the country would not respond to these cases the way that they're happening in DC, and that's why this is happening the way it is.
And Brandon, I want to let everyone know what's going on with the probation and stuff too, especially in my situation. So I've never had any issue with drugs. I've never had a drug problem. I've never failed a drug test ever in my entire life. And part of my probation is every single night, every evening between 5 p.m. and midnight, I have to call I call a number and listen to an automated message. If I hear the number 3 on the automated message, then the following day, I have to report and go take a drug test. Now, I don't care. They can drug test me anytime they want. I don't do drugs or anything like that. But it's the inconvenience of I can't plan my following day until after 5. I have an alarm on my phone to remind myself to call at 5:15 every day. But I cannot plan the events of the following day until I've called that number to see if I have to go take a drug test or not, because I have to go within a certain window. I have to go between 4 and 5 p.m. if I have to go take the test. So every single day at 5:15, I find out if I have to go the following day between 4 and 5 p.m. to take a drug test. And even the people with my probation, people in the probation, people at the drug screening, they're all like, I've never seen this before. I've never heard of this before. And then furthermore, talking about the misdemeanor stuff, I just want people to realize that, like, it is so unheard of for people to go to prison for misdemeanors that you got to remember that the inmates know the system and the rules and just, things that seems fishy. And I'll never forget, they started hollering at me on the yard one day, started yelling for me to come over there. And I go over there and I'm like, what is going on? And because they're specifically wanting me. And they're like, this guy over here, they point him, he's over there, and they're talking to him. He's claiming that he's here right now on misdemeanors for January 6th. Have you ever heard of that? Like, is this guy telling the truth? Like, they were suspicious of him. I mean, it was a big issue until I came out on the yard to let them know that, yeah, oh yeah, that's what's happening right now. They're sending people to prison for misdemeanors, and they had never heard of this. I mean, people who had been in prison for decades had never heard of that before. So I just wanted to share
Yeah,
that.
that was my experience too, because I was getting a lot of mail, and then people said to me, well, why are you getting so much mail? And I was keeping a low profile. So I told people a little bit, and then one of the prison, I mean, nobody had ever heard of anybody going to jail on a misdemeanor. So one of the prison guards, you know how they are, Derek, they like to talk about, oh, I've been a prison guard for 20 years. They're so proud of that they never changed their job. Like, that's their job for their whole life. So they're like, yeah, I've been a prison guard for 20 years, 25 years. Nobody had ever heard of anybody being in prison for misdemeanor. No, they didn't even believe me. It was, yeah.
Can I tell you why? Because the FBI doesn't charge misdemeanors. They don't investigate misdemeanors. It's taught at the academy. It's beneath the role, because there are bigger things to do with our time, and they've rewritten the book because of what they're doing to you all. So there's a reason why this is all new, and it's all bad, and it's all wrong. But it's just something you've never done. Also, John, just another thing that you were mentioning that stood out to me is that nobody wants to be on a jury. Everybody will find any excuse they can to get off a jury. So the idea that these people are trying to get in and get a pound of flesh or be part of it is just another symptom of how sick things are right now in our country on so many levels.
Agreed.
Well, guys, we have been in here for a rather long time. How about this? Why don't we, if anybody has any closing comments that they would like to make, please do. And in the meantime, for those of you who have been sitting in the space and listening, we thank you so much for taking the time to hear our stories. I really do hope that you got a different perspective and learned some things that you didn't know before, and maybe even some strong talking points and arguments for when you're talking to other people who are brainwashed about the information about January 6th. Please take a minute and give everybody a follow who's on the speaker panel while we're kind of doing closing comments. And stay in touch, keep following us. I've been speaking out about this now for about a year. I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah, with that, I'll turn it over if you guys have any closing comments you want to make.
I just want to thank everybody for the overwhelming amount of support and the love I'm feeling from all of the listeners. It means the world to me. Every time I do a interview or a podcast, I get hate mail, and we received hate mail even right after Matt's death, and people saying he deserved what he got. And so to feel the support of everybody here has been a true blessing. And I want to thank you, Brandon, for putting this together. And I wish all of you a good night.
Thank you, Geri. Anybody else?
I'll go. I just, guys, what Geri just said is so true. The hate mail and the hatred just from the media, all these things is so strong and so real. And you got to remember that some of these people that are sitting in prison right now, they've been in prison, and some of them in solitary confinement for 600, almost 700 days now. And so they don't see the support out here on these Twitter spaces. They don't see the support from, people on Twitter here and there. And that's why I really just, every time I speak, I just really beg everybody to please take a few minutes and go to patriotmailproject.com. They're not asking for money or anything like that. It's literally just a list of an updated list of the prisoners and where they're being held and like an address to write them a letter. Please, you guys truly, you have no idea how much it would mean to them and how much they need our support. And Todd, to hear you saying that you've been, doing this on a daily basis, man, I just want you to know that I personally consider you a patriot for doing that, because you guys have no idea how much it means to these people. And please, I'm begging you to just take the time to write a letter. But other than that, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to our stories tonight. Everybody in the media who are doing a great job, Julie Kelly, Cara Castronova, others, probably should have started naming names. There's other Epic Times, Gateway Pundit. You guys, thank you so much for giving us a voice and being the little bit of voice of reason out there. But God bless you guys, and I hope you guys have a great night.
Yeah, I want to echo that and also say thank you so much, Geri, for sharing your story and your heart. We're just very grateful for your courage and your tenacity and persistence. We just pray and encourage you to continue believing, taking hope that God is greater and He has a plan for all of us. Thank you for participating, and thank you, Brandon, for hosting this, and all the speakers for participating and sharing stories. It's the way forward is truth. The way forward is to continue pressing and to continue sharing and to continue to contend or fight for what we believe in, and that means we have to speak our mind. That's what America's about. So keep fighting for that. Thanks, guys.
I just want to say thank you, Brandon. I think this was a really excellent Twitter space. It's a hard subject to cover, and I hope that people go forward in their own lives and just spread the word. Whoever would ask the question, what can you do? What small actions can you take? You literally can just tell people. You can tell people the supermarket, right? You can tell maybe your local newspaper. Local news is a little bit less biased than national news. National news is completely sunk, but sometimes local news, you can get, an op-ed, and there are things you can do, and just don't allow yourself to be silenced. That's what these spaces are about. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just close out by saying, too, I've been looking down the last couple of minutes, and I see the NBC reporter Ryan Riley here. And Ryan Riley has literally dedicated his entire life to obsessively writing about January 6th and some really malicious things. He's made fun of you, John. He's made fun of you, Simone. He actually furthered the story that I turned you in. He's made comments about Matthew. Ryan, I really hope that perhaps you're capable of developing, even the smallest amount of empathy, and perhaps seeing some of the people that you've heard tonight as human beings, because I think the pursuit of your journalism and the pursuit of your writing is so destructive and so harmful, and you are causing so much unnecessary pain and damage and harm to people who are already going through a very difficult time. So I hope perhaps you were able to gain a tiny bit of humanity by listening to some of the stories that you heard tonight. I hope so. Anybody else?
I would have other things to say to him, but my mom taught me if I don't have anything nice to say, not to say anything at all. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, it's all about the clicks, I guess, All right. So thank you all so much for attending the space tonight. We really, really appreciate it. And like I said, I hope you guys learned something and got a new perspective on this. Thank you, Dr. Simone Gold. Thank you, Derrick Evans. Thank you, Geri Perna. Thank you, John Strand. We lost Julie Kelly, but it was amazing having her in here with us tonight. It was amazing having Nick Searcy. And thank you to Nick from my team for helping co-host the space. Thank you guys so much. And we love you all. Have a great night.
Have a great night.
Love you, Nick. Good night.
Good night, everyone.